The icy phone pressed tight against my ear, hard as a brick fresh out of a freezer, digging painfully into my cartilage. The voice from the hospital drilled into my ear, buzzing, every word carrying the chill of disinfectant. Mr. Lin, your wife, Ms. Su Wan, underwent a successful surgery. Her vitals are stable. I stood frozen before the massive floor-to-ceiling window of my office. Below, the city lights blurred into a river of cheap, scattered diamonds. But in my eyes, this scenery was nothing but a swaying halo of light, unnervingly hollow. Amen. I squeezed a sound from my throat. It was dry and raspy. My fingers tightened unconsciously, knuckles turning dead white, nearly crushing the innocent coffee cup in my hand. Warm brown liquid squirted from the deformed rim, sliding down my fingers, sticky, smelling of burnt, cheap coffee powder, and dripping onto the sleek floor. Pat, pat. In the overly quiet top-floor office, that sound was amplified, beating annoyingly against my nerves. The glass window acted like a blurry mirror, reflecting my own shadow. My face was pale as a freshly painted wall, brows furrowed so tight the creases could crush a fly. The voice on the other end kept babbling, the flat tone making me want to smash the phone. However, there's a situation I must inform you of. Under the severe impact, Ms. Su suffered a concussion to the brain, resulting in selective amnesia. Our preliminary assessment suggests her memory has suffered large-scale gaps and confusion. Currently, her memory is stable at a point. Approximately 3 years ago. 3 years ago, my heart felt like it was seized by an invisible giant hand and squeezed hard, stopping dead. 3 years ago. That was shortly after we first met, before we had even. Get to the point. My voice shot up, snapping like a string pulled to its limit, hoarse and cracking, carrying a rage unfamiliar even to myself. My reflection in the glass shook, eyes fierce enough to eat someone alive. The person on the other end seemed choked by my sudden hostility, stalling for 2 seconds. In the background, the monotonous beep-beep of medical instruments could be heard, adding to the suffocation. Ahem, the doctor cleared his throat, his tone sounding difficult, tainted with an unspeakable absurdity. The point is, Miss Su has absolutely no memory of the fact that she is married, and the name Lin Yu means nothing to her. She is currently in quite high spirits. She is in the ward, He stalled again, seemingly searching for words. Doing what? My patience was completely exhausted. Every word felt like shards of ice squeezed through my teeth. She is currently using the secondary black card in your name. The doctor's voice dropped lower, carrying the awkwardness of someone witnessing a massive public humiliation. Very focused, very enthusiastically. Shopping online. She is mainly buying limited edition photo books and HD posters of popular young male idols. She's scrolling and commenting at the same time, saying this little puppy is really nice, that one's abs are killer. I gripped the phone, silent. Outside the window, the city lights were still blinding, traffic converging into rivers of light. The coffee stain bloomed into a small dark patch on the floor by my feet. The smell of cheap, burnt coffee in the air seemed to grow stronger. 3 years ago. Black card? Little puppy? Ups. Fine. Suwon, you're really something. A ghastly white ceiling, blindingly bright. The smell of disinfectant in the air was so strong it choked the throat. Suwon leaned back against the hospital bed, her back digging into the hard plastic headboard. Her bones felt weak, and she was a little out of it. She lifted the hand without the foredrip and rubbed her temples hard. Her fingertips were ice cold. Her brain felt stuffed with a ball of yarn clawed apart by a cat. Messy, impossible to untangle. Many things were blurry, as if seen through thick frosted glass, indistinct. She only remembered rushing a deadline for a killer project proposal, pulling a few all-nighters, and then everything going black. Next thing she knew, she was here. A doctor in a white coat, masked so only his eyes were visible, stood by the bed, scribbling away on a clipboard. Next to him was a nurse, fiddling with a forestand. Ms. Su, the doctor spoke, his voice slightly muffled by the mask. How are you feeling? Still dizzy? Suwon shook her head, trying to shake out the mess inside, but the movement was too big. It pulled at the back of her head with a dull pain, making her hiss involuntarily. I'm okay. Just a bit dazed. She frowned, trying hard to recall. Doctor, how did I get in here? Did I just pass out from overtime? The doctor and nurse exchange a look. Suwon understood that look. It screamed, "This mess is going to be hard to handle." Ms. Su, the doctor began cautiously, his tone incredibly gentle, as if he were coaxing a kindergartner. Your situation is quite complex. It wasn't just a simple fainting spell. You were in a car accident and suffered a blow to the head. Car accident. Suwon's eyes widened instantly, her mouth gaping open wide enough to fit an egg. She subconsciously reached up to touch the back of her head and, sure enough, felt a patch of thick gauze. Me? A car accident. The concept felt light years away from her life, as distant as a past life. As a corporate drone shuttling strictly between her office and her rental apartment every day, where would she even find a car to crash? Yes. The doctor nodded, his gaze reassuring. Fortunately, your life isn't in danger, and the surgery went smoothly. However, he paused, seemingly choosing his words. The impact has affected your memory. Our preliminary diagnosis is that you are experiencing symptoms of selective amnesia. Selective amnesia? Suwon blinked. The term sounded awfully abstract. She asked tentatively, "So, what did I forget? I didn't forget how to write code, did I?" If that were the case, she was screwed. Her livelihood would be gone. The doctor shook his head gently, his expression turning a bit more serious. Based on our current communication and tests, your memory of the past 3 years contains large blanks or is extremely blurry. Particularly, he paused again, as if preparing her mentally, particularly regarding significant changes in your personal life, such as your marital status. Marital status? Suwon repeated the words, her brain failing to process them for a moment. What do you mean? I'm married. She pointed at her own nose, wearing a look that said, "Are you kidding me? Impossible. Absolutely impossible. I don't have even a hair of a boyfriend. I've been single since birth, 25 years. Who would I marry? Did I exchange vows with my computer tower?" She said this with absolute certainty, carrying the absurdity of someone wrongly accused. Yet the I knew it expressions on the doctors' and nurses' faces only grew more distinct. "Ms. Su, according to our records, you are indeed married." The doctor's tone was firm. "Your husband is Mr. Lin Yu. He waited outside the operating room all last night and only left this morning for an important company meeting. He should be back very soon." Lin Yu? Suwon frowned, turning the name over and over in her mind. Blank. It was as unfamiliar as a Martian name. Husband? She was married? And to a man named Lin Yu? This was more ridiculous than telling her an alien had suddenly popped out of her code. Impossible. Suwon's voice went up an octave, laced with a panic she didn't even realize she felt. Even if I have amnesia, it can't be this absurd, right? How could I be married? To whom? When? I have zero memory of this. Did you get the wrong person? Or maybe someone with the same name. The doctor sighed helplessly and held the clipboard closer to her. "Ms. Su, this is a copy of your ID, as well as the signature in the next of kin section from your admission. Lin Yu." Also, he pointed to the bedside table. Suwon followed his finger. Sitting there all alone was a dark blue velvet jewelry box. It looked high-end. She hadn't noticed it at all before. The nurse walked over, carefully picked up the box, and opened it. Inside lay a diamond ring. The style was simple to the point of being cold and hard. A platinum band set with a perfectly cut diamond. It wasn't huge, but its brilliance was incredibly sharp. Under the pale hospital lights, it refracted a cold, dazzling shimmer that was blinding to look at. Suwon stared at the ring, and as if stung by the light, she abruptly retracted her gaze. Her heart skipped a beat for no reason. Unfamiliar, cold, devoid of feeling. Was this thing really hers? "We took this off your hand," the nurse said softly, placing the box on the quilt beside her hand. The velvet felt fine and cool, the sensation seeping through her thin hospital gown to her skin. Suwon curled her fingers as if she'd been burned, not daring to touch the box. Her brain was buzzing, more chaotic than before. Married? Husband? A diamond ring? What the hell was all this? Irritated, she raked her hand through her hair, only to bump the gauze on the back of her head again, making her wince in pain. Her gaze swept over the bag on the chair beside the bed, the one the nurse said her husband had left. She grabbed the commuter bag, which seemed to be of good quality, unzipped it, and rummaged through it frantically. Wallet, keys, lipstick, a spare charger. Her fingers brushed against a small, hard card with a matte texture. She pulled it out to take a look. A pure black bank card. The face of the card had no fancy patterns, just a line of raised, gold-stamped English letters. So low-key, it bordered on pretentious. In the corner was a tiny, familiar logo, the emblem of the game company she worked for, Phantasm Tech. Was this the legendary, top-tier black card? She had only ever seen pictures of this kind of thing in financial gossip columns. Soo-won clutched the cold, hard little card, her fingertips trembling slightly. As an ordinary programmer, even with a promotion and a raise, she was still light years away from possessing something like this. How did it end up in her bag? Did that husband of hers, Lin Yu, give it to her? Her mind was a chaotic mess. Her status as a married woman felt like a massive, dead-heavy pot, lid slamming down with a clang, hitting her until she saw stars and couldn't breathe. She urgently needed something else to dilute this suffocating sense of absurdity. She needed a distraction, fast. Soo-won took a deep breath, tossed the heavy black card onto the blanket, and fished out her phone. The screen lit up and unlocked. Thank goodness, her fingerprints still worked. Her fingers trembling slightly, she relied on muscle memory to tap open the orange icon of a major shopping app. Her fingertips swiped across the screen rapidly. Right now, she needed something to spike her dopamine. She needed something fresh, eye-catching, and capable of proving her aesthetic sense was still online. The page refreshed, pushing a feed full of the hottest male celebrities. Face after young, handsome face, full of collagen, rushed at her with smiles that were either sunny or cool. Soo-won's eyes finally lit up, and her fingers tapped away furiously. TSK, this puppy dog type has snaggle teeth when he smiles. So cute. Wow. Those abs. Those lines. That body ratio. Incredible. Making this my screensaver to drool over every day. This abstinent look with the glasses is slaying me. He's the very definition of a refined bad boy. Bye. I need a set of limited edition posters. I absolutely must have that high-def photo book. This signed photo. Hiss, a bit pricey, but worth it. Going for it. Muttering to herself, she placed orders without hesitation, flying through the payment process with practiced ease. She pulled up the info for that cold black supplementary card and used it directly. Anyway, it was that husband's card. Why not use it? Just consider it. Compensation for mental distress? She felt a tiny pang of guilt over this slightly shameless thought, but was quickly healed by the beautiful bodies and faces of the fresh young hunks on the screen. Order successful. Looking at the rows of spiritual food awaiting shipment in her order list, Soo-won let out a long sigh of relief, feeling that the knot in her chest had loosened just a tiny bit. Who cares about amnesia or husbands? First, admire beautiful things and soothe her poor, frightened little soul. The hospital room door quietly pushed open a crack. Soo-won was immersed in the joy of scrolling through pictures of another boy band and didn't notice a thing. Outside the door, a tall, cold figure paused there, like a statue devoid of warmth. Lin Yu's gaze passed through the crack in the door, landing precisely on the woman in the hospital bed who was clutching her phone, her eyes gleaming as she stared at the abs of the young man on the screen. He saw her finger rapidly tapping by now and saw the pile of eyesores in her cart. Celebrity signed photo, high-def photo book, limited edition poster. Lin Yu's thin lips pressed into a straight, curve-less line, his jawline pulled tight. His eyes were as deep as a frozen pool, without a single ripple, emitting only a bone-piercing chill that spread silently. His fingers gripping the door handle slowly tightened. The coldness of the metal seeping through his skin couldn't seem to suppress the inexplicable fire in his heart. Fine, Soo-won, using my money to feed your eyes. He ultimately didn't push the door open, but silently took a step back and closed the crack. The sound of his retreating footsteps in the empty corridor was as cold and hard as an ice pick striking the ground. 3. Meeting the iceberg 3 months later. Illusion Tech headquarters, top floor, CEO's office. Outside the massive curved floor-to-ceiling windows lay the city's concrete skyline, bathed in blinding sunlight. Lin Yu sat behind a large black desk, his back perfectly straight. His dark gray bespoke suit didn't have a single crease, outlining the sharp lines of his broad shoulders and narrow waist. His eyes were lowered, his slender fingers holding a newly delivered project budget report. His fingertip tapped on a specific, exaggerated figure, making a soft click. The air was thick with low pressure. The project director, standing across the desk, had a patch of cold sweat soaking through the back of his shirt, terrified to breathe too loudly. Just then, a knock-knock-knock sounded at the door, tentative and cautious. Lin Yu didn't even lift his eyelids, his voice cold enough to freeze the air. "Enter." The door was pushed open, and the HR manager's round, chubby face, plastered with a fake professional smile, poked in. "Mr. Lin, sorry to disturb you. The new intern for the technology department is here to report for duty. I brought their file for your review." He stepped aside, revealing a figure behind him. Lin Yu's gaze remained fixed on that damn budget report as he replied indifferently, "Put it on the table." Light, brisk footsteps approached the desk, carrying a reckless vitality unique to the young. Immediately following came a soft thud. A cup of milk tea was plunked down, neither gently nor forcefully, onto the edge of his expensive mahogany desk. It was a pink plastic cup, its sides beaded with condensation, with a thick straw adorned with a smiley face sticking out of the top. Printed across the cup in huge, gaudy letters was the slogan, "Taro Boba, a sweet critical hit." This pink, sweet critical hit formed a contrast of cosmic, nuclear proportions against his cold-toned, serious office saturated with low pressure. Lin Yu finally tore his gaze away from the report and slowly looked up. His gaze first landed on that utterly incongruous cup of milk tea, reeking of cheap sweetness, pausing there for a second. Then, following the slender, fair hand gripping the cup, his eyes traveled upward, inch by inch. Light blue jeans, washed until slightly faded. A simple white t-shirt with a goofy cartoon cat printed on the chest. Further up was a face. After 3 months apart, that face had lost the pallor of the sickbed and regained a healthy, rosy glow. Her hair was cut shorter into a neat shoulder-length bob that accentuated her pointed chin. At this moment, those eyes he knew so well, eyes that had once held cunning or tenderness, were looking at him sparklingly. They shone with a light he had never seen in them before, pure, bold, and eager. Interest? Like a child who had discovered the shiniest new toy in a shop window. "Suwon." She tilted her head, her lips curving into an incredibly brilliant, infectious smile that revealed a row of small, white teeth. Her voice was crisp, carrying a deliberate, feigned familiarity and a trace of barely concealed nervousness. "Hi there, President Lin. New intern, Suwon." She pointed to the pink bomb. "A meeting gift. Taro boba, full sugar, no ice. Life is too bitter. You gotta add a little sweetness." She leaned in a tiny bit closer, her eyes frighteningly bright, as if 2 little stars had fallen into them. She stared straight at Lin Yu's chiseled face, currently as cold as an ice sculpture, and dropped a bombshell. "Hey, uncle, let's exchange WeChats." The air solidified. It was as if someone had hit the pause button on time. At the door, the HR manager's professional fake smile completely petrified, cracked, and crumbled into dust. His eyes bulged round, his mouth agape wide enough to fit a whole egg, looking for all the world like an overly traumatized carp. Cold sweat whooshed out, instantly soaking his expensive silk collar. Across from him, the project director, already trembling over the budget, gasped so hard he nearly choked to death. He looked in horror at the intern who had a death wish, plunking milk tea on the boss's desk, then at his boss's face, radiating a chill like an impending storm, and felt his career collapsing before his eyes. In the vast office, only the low hum of the central AC remained. On the pink milk tea cup, a bead of water, unable to bear the weight, fell with a plip onto the mirror-smooth mahogany surface. Lin Yu didn't move. He didn't even look at the milk tea that challenged the lower limits of his aesthetic and authority. His gaze settled heavily on Su Wan's face. In those deep-set eyes, a faint, elusive ripple seemed to pass. So fast it felt like an illusion. Immediately, they returned to the calm and chill of a deep pool. He leaned back slightly into the wide leather chair, hands clasped casually over his crossed knees. An extremely relaxed posture, yet one carrying an invisible sense of oppression. The corner of his mouth tugged upward, agonizingly slowly. That was not a smile. The arc was cold, sharp, carrying a condescending scrutiny and indescribable amusement. "Sue-Won," he spoke, his voice low and steady, betraying no emotion, yet grating like ice rubbing against ice. Company rule number 1. No food or drinks allowed in the office area, especially. His gaze finally offered a stingy glance at the pink bomb, his tone dripping with undisguised disgust. This kind of high-sugar trash. The brilliant smile on Sue-Won's face froze for a moment, but only a moment. Her astonishingly bright eyes blinked. Instead of retreating, she seemed to be provoked by some strange competitive spirit. She scooted a small step forward, getting even closer to the large desk. "Rules are dead, but people are alive." Her voice was crisp, carrying a bit of roguish charm. "Besides, look, President Lin," she pointed at the milk tea with great solemnity. "Look at how pure this color is. How festive. Placed here in your dark, cold office, it's basically a ray of dawn lighting up life." The HR manager felt like he was suffocating. He winked frantically at Sue-Won until his eyes nearly cramped. But alas, Sue-Won's attention was entirely focused on the iceberg behind the desk. Lin Yu's brow twitched imperceptibly. A ray of light? Illuminating life? He looked at her face, which was written all over with the fearlessness of a newborn calf, and the hint of amusement deep in his eyes seemed to deepen just a fraction. "Is that so?" His tone remained flat as his fingers tapped lightly on the smooth armrest. "It seems, intern Sue, that your definition of a ray of light is quite unique." He leaned forward slightly, and that oppressive sense of pressure instantly intensified. His gaze, sharp as a blade, pierced straight through Sue-Won. "So, as the ray of light illuminating my office, have you finished your pre-employment test? If I recall correctly, the deadline is 3 o'clock this afternoon." The smile on Sue-Won's face finally cracked, looking like a pop balloon. That algorithm optimization. Her eyes darted away, clearly lacking confidence. I'm working on it. It's being done. It'll be ready soon." "Soon." Lin Yu repeated the word unhurriedly, lifting his hand to glance at the expensive steel watch on his wrist. "There are 47 minutes left until 3 o'clock. He looked up, his eyes devoid of warmth. "Huanja doesn't need employees who will be done soon. Only results that are delivered on time. Can you not do it?" He paused deliberately, his gaze sweeping over her instantly crestfallen face, before slowly spitting out the final word. "Leave." "I can do it." Sue-Won reacted like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, almost jumping up, her voice pitching high. "I can definitely do it. Just you wait and see, President Lin." She scrambled to grab the document bag she had brought, turning to rush out and escape this suffocating low pressure. "Wait." Lin Yu's voice wasn't loud, but it acted like an invisible rope, instantly tripping her feet. Sue-Won frozen in place, her heart pounding, daring not look back. "Take your ray of light with you." Lin Yu's gaze returned to the eyesore of a pink milk tea, his tone flat, but carrying an unquestionable command. "Take it away. Also, if I see any junk food in the office area again." He didn't finish the sentence, but the threat in the unspoken words carried more weight than anything else. Sue-Won shuddered. She spun around, snatched up the cup of sweet as salt from the desk, and cradled it in her arms like a hot potato. Head down, cheeks flushed red, she didn't dare look at Lin Yu again as she scrambled out of the office with messy steps, nearly crashing into the doorframe. Bang! The door clicked shut. The office returned to a suffocating silence. But the low pressure didn't dissipate. Instead, it grew thicker. The HR manager was still frozen at the door, face pale, lips trembling as he tried to explain. President Lin, this intern, her credentials passed the review, and her written test scores were good. It's just, maybe she's young, doesn't know the rules too reckless." Lin Yu's gaze returned to the budget report as if the farce just now hadn't happened. He picked up his pen and, next to the glaring number on the report, signed his name with a flourish, rejected. The pen tip scratched across the paper with a soft rustle. Reckless. He didn't look up, his voice betraying no emotion. Interesting, actually. The HR manager paused, unable to figure out if the boss's interesting was praise or criticism. Did he think the intern was amusingly stupid, or something else? He didn't dare ask, so he wiped his cold sweat and retreated obsequiously. Lin Yu was the only one left in the office. He put down the pen, leaned back into his chair again, and looked out the massive floor-to-ceiling window. The sunlight was intense, yet it couldn't dispel the depth in his eyes. A moment later, he picked up the internal line and dialed a number. Secretary Chan. His voice returned to its usual cold hardness. The new intern in the technology department, Su-won, raised the difficulty coefficient of the algorithm optimization test she's in charge of to S-class. I want to see her solution process and result report on my desk at 3 o'clock sharp. The person on the other end seemed to hesitate. President Lin? S-class? That's for senior engineers. Just do it. Lin Yu interrupted him, his tone brooking no argument. Putting down the phone, his slender fingers unconsciously rotated the cold platinum wedding ring on his ring finger. Inside the ring, 2 tiny letters were engraved, W and Y. His gaze became deep and unfathomable again. Su-won, you've forgotten who you are, forgotten who I am, but your guts have certainly grown. He wanted to see just what kind of splash this little wild cat, who had lost her memory and was baring her fangs and claws, could make right under his nose. 4. Code battlefield on the floor housing the technology department. The air permanently smelled of a mix of caffeine and code. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the 3 o'clock sun shone brightly, illuminating the rows of workstations. Su-won darted back to her cubicle like a cat whose tail had been stepped on, her arms still tightly clutching that cup of taro bobo, which had already turned lukewarm. Her cheeks were hot enough to fry an egg, and her heart was drumming inside her chest. Thump, 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 vibrating so hard her eardrums tingled. Wan, how'd it go? How did it go? Zhao Xiao from the neighboring cubicle immediately leaned in like a cat catching the scent of fish. She lowered her voice, her eyes gleaming. Did you see CEO Lin in the flesh? Is he earth-shatteringly handsome? Is his aura 10 feet tall? Tell me, did you get frozen into an ice sculpture? Su-won slammed the milk tea onto the desk with a dull thud and slumped in her ergonomic chair, looking utterly despairing. Forget ice sculpture. I felt like I was about to be flayed alive by his gaze right then and there. It was terrifying. She patted her chest, recounting her heroic deeds in the top-floor office with lingering fear, delivering milk tea, asking for his WeChat, getting scolded, being threatened with termination, and finally fleeing in disgrace. Puffed. Zhao Xiao couldn't hold it back and burst out laughing. She hurriedly covered her mouth, her shoulders shaking. A warrior. Wan, you're absolutely the brave warrior of the year. You dare to shove milk tea onto CEO Lin's desk and called him uncle to his face to ask for his WeChat? My God, do you know how the last female supervisor who tried to deliver coffee to him got sent packing? How was I supposed to know? Su-won wailed, burying her face in her arms. I just had a rush of blood to the head and got impulsive. Who knew he was so fierce? 100 times scarier than the rumors online. She peeked out from the crook of her arm with one eye, looking pitiful. And Xiao, he actually remembered my test. S rank. It's due at 3 this afternoon. I haven't even sorted out my train of thought. It's over. My internship is going to end before it even starts. S rank. Zhao Xiao sucked in a cold breath and patted her shoulders sympathetically. My condolences. An S-rank task overseen personally by CEO Lin. Sister, you're on your own. Su-won looked up desperately at the computer screen, where the opened algorithm model looked as complex as hieroglyphics, making her vision swim. That cup of pink, sweet critical hit stood on the corner of the desk like a giant mockery. No, she couldn't just give up. The word coward did not exist in Su-won's dictionary, especially not in front of that iceberg uncle. A surge of spite mixed with inexplicable fighting spirit shot up from the soles of her feet to the top of her skull. She sat up straight abruptly and took a deep breath, her eyes turning fierce, or rather suicidal, milk tea. Is it? Junk food, is it? Fine. Lin Yu. Just you wait. She grabbed the mouse, moving like lightning. She quickly maximized the window minimized in the bottom right corner, the orange shopping app. Her fingertips flew across the screen, driven by a desperate, burn-all-bridges resolve. Want to eat junk food? I'm going to make you eat it, and the junkiest kind. Look down on my milk tea. I'll let you taste a real calorie bomb. Aren't you all aloof and ascetic? I'll make you break. Uncle, accept the wrath of an intern. She muttered through gritted teeth, stabbing at her phone screen as if fighting a battle for her dignity. 5 Sweet Trap. 5 minutes to 3 in the afternoon. The door to the CEO's office was knocked, the sound carrying a hint of resignation to death. Come in. Lin Yu's voice remained devoid of warmth. The door opened. Su-won shuffled in with heavy steps, holding an oversized brown paper bag emblazoned with a striking yellow M logo, as if she were carrying a pack of dynamite. Head bowed, daring not to look at the person behind the desk, she walked straight to the expansive mahogany desk. Gently, yet with immense determination, she set the paper bag, emitting the rich aroma of fried food, onto the surface with a thud. It landed precisely over the faint water ring left by the milk tea that morning. Lin Yu's gaze shifted from a document to land on this obtrusive paper bag reeking of rubbish. His brow furrowed almost imperceptibly, and a clear trace of disgust flitted across his eyes. CEO Lin. Su-won's voice was tight, though she strove to maintain composure. My algorithm optimization report and the problem-solving documentation are all on the USB drive. I've also emailed them to you. She spoke rapidly, as if completing a monumental task, and turned to slip away. Halt! Lin Yu's voice wasn't loud, but held a strange, penetrating power that instantly nailed her feet to the floor. Su-won's heart leaped into her throat as she stiffly turned around. Lin Yu's gaze finally shifted from the greasy paper bag to her face. He leaned forward slightly, resting his arms on the edge of the desk with his fingers interlaced. The platinum wedding ring caught the light, reflecting a cold, hard glint. His gaze was sharp as a hawk, carrying scrutiny and a trace of amusement as it leisurely swept over Su-won's small face, which had turned slightly pale from nervousness. I received the report. He spoke slowly, his speed measured as if savoring every word. The line of reasoning is barely clear. There are a few clever tricks, but the overall logic holds together. For an intern, he paused deliberately, looking at Su-won's fists clenched in tension. It's so. You pass. Passed. Su-won's tense shoulders instantly slumped a little, and she almost forgot to breathe. She got through. She actually survived under the double pressure of an S-class mission and her iceberg boss. However, Lin Yu's next sentence immediately extinguished the small flame of relief that had just sparked within her with a pft. But he lifted his chin slightly and tapped the huge paper bag on the desk that was emitting an unhealthy aroma, his tone as flat as if he were discussing the weather. Intern Su, can you explain what this is? Here it comes. Su-won's scalp prickled, and she braced herself to meet his scrutinizing gaze, trying to squeeze out an innocent smile. This, President Lin, seeing how you manage 10,000 things a day and forget to eat and sleep, you must be hungry. So I specially ordered afternoon tea for you, to replenish your energy. Work requires a balance between labor and rest. After all, afternoon tea. The corners of Lin Yu's mouth lifted extremely slowly into a cold arc. He reached out, his slender fingers displaying a kind of elegant disdain, and lifted the opening of the greasy paper bag. The contents revealed inside made Secretary Chun, who was just about to enter with documents and happened to see this scene, slip and almost perform a faceplant. The paper bag was packed to the brim, a Big Mac, the bun slathered with white mayonnaise, a large box of golden, crispy, glistening McNuggets, a large portion of thick, salt-sprinkled fries, a large cup of dark brown ice cola with a thick straw, condensation beating on the cup, and a large strawberry sundae. Pink strawberry sauce dripped onto the snow-white ice cream, looking incredibly sickly sweet. It was a perfect collection of high-calorie, high-sugar, high-fat junk food. It perfectly stepped on every single landmine of Lin Yu. a boss famous for his strict diet and perverted pursuit of health. The air solidified once again. Secretary Chun held his breath, feeling the temperature around the boss drop to absolute zero. Lin Yu's gaze lingered on the pile of calorie bombs for a few seconds, then slowly lifted to lock back onto Su-won. That look was bottomless, carrying an all-knowing clarity and extremely dangerous amusement. He suddenly smiled. It wasn't that cold arc from before, but a genuine, extremely faint smile. Appearing on his perennially icebound face, this smile didn't melt the chill. Instead, like sunlight hitting a polar glacier, it refracted an even colder light. "Specially ordered for me?" He slowly repeated Su-won's words, the ending note rising slightly, carrying a hint of indescribable mockery. "Intern Su, this gesture of yours is truly original." Su-won felt creeped out by his smile, the hairs on the back of her neck standing up. She felt like a little rabbit targeted by an apex predator with nowhere to run. "Fine." Lin Yu leaned back against his chair, hands clasped again, his wedding ring glaringly conspicuous. He looked at Su-won, his eyes calm and ripple-less, yet carrying an unquestionable tone of final judgment. "I accept the afternoon tea." Su-won post. "Accepted?" Just like that? However, Lin Yu's tone suddenly turned cold and hard. "In return, the preliminary user research report for the Mirage project you are responsible for." He paused deliberately, watching the glimmer of luck in Su-won's eyes fade rapidly, replaced by fresh terror. "Redo it." 2 words. Clear, cold, decisive. "Huh." Su-won looked as if she had been struck by lightning, her small face collapsing instantly as a wail escaped her lips. "Why, President Lin, I stayed up for 3 whole nights for that report. I lost a handful of hair." "Why?" Lin Yu raised an eyebrow, his fingertip tapping lightly on the desk, making a crisp sound. His gaze swept pointedly over the huge McDonald's paper bag on the table. "Because I suddenly feel that you seem to have an excess of energy and plenty of time to spend on balancing work and rest." His gaze settled back on Su-won's face, which was written all over with breakdown. The cold, spitefully amused arc at the corner of his mouth deepened. 10 times. He added unhurriedly, his voice not loud, yet it sounded like a judge pronouncing a final sentence. "Next Monday morning, I want to see 10 research reports on the Mirage project on my desk, each from a different angle, different depth, and covering every potential user pain point. If there's one missing, or if the quality is not up to par." He leaned forward slightly, that oppressive pressure once again enveloping Su-won. His eyes were sharp as knife blades, every word smashing clearly against her eardrums. "Pack your things and go." Su-won stood frozen in place, feeling as though 10,000 alpacas were galloping through her mind, kicking up a cloud of dust. She looked at the man behind the desk, calm, composed, as if he had merely issued the most ordinary of instructions, and then looked at the McDonald's paper bag standing on the desk like a piece of incriminating evidence. A massive wave of grievance, mixed with the anger of being toyed with, suddenly rushed to her head. Blood instantly surged to her cheeks, burning the tips of her ears red. Why? Just because she sent him a cup of milk tea and a bag of burgers? He has to work her to death? 10 reports? By next week? Is this something a human being would do? Even a capitalist wouldn't be this ruthless. Lin Yu. The name rushed out of her mouth almost without passing through her brain, carried by a chest full of fury and grievance. The voice exploded in the overly quiet top-floor office, sounding exceptionally loud and abrupt. Secretary Chun, who was standing at the door clutching documents and trying to be invisible, shook with fright, nearly dropping his folder. He looked at Su-won in horror, as if gazing at a brave warrior about to self-destruct on the spot. The trace of a cold arc on Lin Yu's face vanished without a trace. He slowly raised his eyes, his gaze like a solid ice pick, stabbing straight at Su-won. The air pressure in the entire office plummeted. Even the whir of the central air conditioning seemed to stagnate. "What did you call me?" His voice was low and level, yet held the dead silence that precedes a storm. Every word felt coated in shards of ice. Su-won shivered under that gaze. The anger that had rushed to her head was instantly doused by half, leaving only a belated panic. "It's over." How did she shout out the name she was saying in her heart? And she shouted it so loudly, so righteously. Looking at Lin Yu's face, radiating cold air and impending doom, a massive survival instinct instantly crushed everything else. Her brain spun at unprecedented speed. Run. Must run. This place is not safe. In a split second, Suwon made a move that nearly caused Secretary Chen's eyes to pop out of his head. She bent violently at the waist, executing as standard as can be 90-degree bow in Lin Yu's direction. The movement was so sweeping, she almost banged her forehead on the edge of the desk. I'm sorry, President Lin. I was wrong. Her voice was loud and resounding, carrying a tragic, go-for-broke quality. I'll go redo the report right now. 10 times. I promise to have them on your desk on time next Monday. If there is one word missing, you can fire me. Having roared this all in one breath, she didn't dare lift her head to check Lin Yu's expression. Maintaining the bowing posture, she bounced backward a giant step as if her feet were spring-loaded, then turned and bolted. The movements were executed in one smooth flow, fast as a rabbit. Bang! The heavy solid wood door of the office was slammed shut with all her might, making a deafening noise that seemed to make even the walls tremble. The door panel cut off the outside world. Inside the office, there was a deathly silence. The giant McDonald's bag on the table emitted a stubborn aroma of fried food. The water droplets on the wall of the iced cola cup gathered into a thin stream, sliding silently down to form a small, dark, cold water stain on the polished mahogany desk. Lin Yu remained in his original posture, leaning back in his chair. There was no expression on his face, only a complex undercurrent surging deep within his eyes. Anger? Perhaps a little. The offense of being addressed by his full name by a lowly intern. But more than that, there was a sense of loss of control that even he hadn't anticipated. Watching her flee in panic like a small animal that had been provoked into puffing up its fur only to turn cowardly, that clumsy yet desperate 90-degree bow. A strange, slightly dark amusement quietly took root. He slowly raised his hand, his thumb unconsciously and forcefully rubbing the cold platinum ring on his ring finger. The letters W and Y, engraved on the inner band, pressed against his skin. Suwon. She had forgotten who he was, yet dared to challenge his bottom line again and again. She had forgotten their relationship, yet used this clumsy and ridiculous method to try and get close. He picked up the internal line and dialed the technical department. Managerly, his voice returned to its usual cold hardness. The new intern, Suwon. The user research report for the Mirage project is to be her sole responsibility. Give her level 1 database access. Also, arrange a window seat for her, somewhere relatively quiet. He paused, then added, to make it easier for her to balance work and rest. The person on the other end of the phone seemed to freeze for a moment before hurriedly complying. Yes, Mr. Lin. Hanging up, Lin Yu's gaze landed once again on that greasy McDonald's paper bag, his eyes dark and unfathomable. The game seemed to be just a little bit more interesting than he had anticipated. 6. The rose strikes back as the lunch break drew to a close. The air in the technical department was thick with the mingled scents of takeout and coffee, accompanied by the clatter of programmers typing on keyboards, an unending background soundtrack. Suwon was locked in a death match with the dense user research data on her screen. She was seeing stars, feeling as though her hair was abandoning her at a visible rate. 10 reports. Linda Skinner. She cursed that name silently for the 1001st time. Suwon, the voice of Lily, the receptionist, drifted from the doorway, tinged with gossip-fueled excitement. She was holding a massive, exquisitely packaged thermal bag. Your delivery. Wow, look at this packaging. Is this Michelin star level or what? A thermal bag? Delivery? Suwon looked up blankly. She was so broke lately she rattled when she walked. She couldn't even bear to add a sausage to her instant noodles. Where would she get the money to order a delivery that looked this exorbitantly expensive? Mine? There must be a mistake. She walked over and took the heavy, high-quality thermal bag. It was printed with a logo she didn't recognize, but one that screamed high-end. Opening it, she found 3 exquisite Japanese lacquered food boxes. As she lifted the lids, a savory aroma instantly escaped, drawing side glances from several colleagues who were working overtime on empty stomachs. The first tier, translucent salmon roe gunkan gold leaf top foie gras nigiri, and plump, sweet botan shrimp sashimi, plated like a work of art. The second tier, perfectly grilled eel radiating the aroma of fat, wrapped in seaweed and rice, garnished with tender green okra. The third tier, a small bowl of steaming matsutake mushroom teapot soup, the broth clear enough to see the bottom. Beside it sat a small dish of emerald green wasabi and a tiny bottle of Japanese soy sauce. How much did this cost? Suwon's hand trembled as she held the chopsticks. She subconsciously rummaged for the receipt, finally feeling a thick, textured card at the bottom of the bag. A pure black card with gold-stamped English font. On it was a single line of handwritten text. Powerful, bold, and flowing. Replenish your energy, balance work, and rest. Eat less junk. There was no signature, but Suwon's heart felt like it had been slammed by something hard. This handwriting, this tone, the specificity of junk. Who else could it be but that iceberg on the top floor? What did he mean? A slap in the face followed by a sweet date? He tortures her to death with 10 reports in the morning, then sends a frightfully expensive Japanese meal at noon? Is this compensation? Or a new form of torture? Making her beholden to him? Suwon stared at the black card and the words upon it, her small face flushing red, then turning white, her expression shifting unpredictably. Wow, Wanwan, who sent this? Such a grand gesture. Zhao Xiao leaned in, eyes wide as copper bells. This has to be from Bamboo, that top-tier Japanese place, right? It starts at 4 figures per person. Oh my god, a suitor? Or a sugar daddy? She blinked teasingly. Sugar daddy my foot. Suwon reacted like her tail had been stepped on, slapping her hand over the card and stuffing it into her pocket, her cheeks burning. Just someone I know. Don't guess blindly. She looked at the sushi, exquisite beyond words, then thought of that cold face in the top-floor office. A nameless fire mixed with an indescribable awkwardness surged up within her. Eat it. Why should she eat his food? It would make her seem so easy to appease. She hadn't even gotten revenge for this morning yet. Her eyes darted around. A plan formed in her mind. Wearing a kindly smile, she picked up the box with the top-tier gold leaf foie gras nigiri and walked toward the neighboring cubicle, where Engineer Wong, a senior otaku coder with thick glasses, was buried in his work gnawing on a sandwich. Engineer Wong. Suwon's voice was sickeningly sweet. Haven't had lunch yet, right? Here, try this. Just arrived, super fresh. Don't be polite. She shoved the box, obviously worth a fortune, into Engineer Wong's hands without allowing any refusal. Engineer Wong stared at the work of art that had suddenly appeared, his eyes going straight behind his lenses, his sandwich nearly dropping to the floor. This is for me? It's too valuable, isn't it, Wanwan? Oh, it's nothing. Colleagues helping each other out. Suwon waved her hand, feigning an air of generous nonchalance. Next, she picked up the box of plump, sweet botan shrimp sashimi and walked toward another female colleague who was making instant noodles. Sisterly. Stop eating instant noodles. It's bad for your stomach. Taste this shrimp. It's so sweet. Oh my Wanwan, I shouldn't. This is too much. It's fine, really. Good things are meant to be shared. Soon, Suwon had distributed that top-tier Japanese takeout down to the last bite, acting like a benevolent spirit scattering wealth. The colleagues were flattered and thanked her profusely. The IT department was filled with a harmonious atmosphere. Suwon kept only a small bowl of matsutake soup and a few slices of eel for herself. She carried them back to her cubicle and ate with gusto, the knot of awkwardness in her heart finally loosening a bit. Linyu, your work-life balance. I've shared it on your behalf. You're welcome. She didn't notice that in a corner of the IT department, an inconspicuous surveillance camera slightly shifted its angle. 7. Elevator thriller top floor, CEO's office. The huge high-definition surveillance screen was displaying a real-time feed of the IT department. In the center of the screen was Suwon's face, wearing a smug little smile like a cat that had successfully stolen a fish, and that lonely bowl of matsutake soup in front of her. Linyu leaned back in his chair, toying with an expensive fountain pen in his hand. He watched the little woman on the screen generously distributing the top-tier cuisine he had sent to her colleagues, leaving only the most inconspicuous soup and scraps for herself. The cold curve at the corner of his mouth didn't disappear. Instead, it deepened. The pen twirled nimbly between his slender fingers, its nib reflecting a cold glint. A faint, low chuckle of ambiguous meaning escaped his thin lips. Quite vindictive, and quite skilled at winning people over. He picked up his phone, opened an encrypted chat window, and typed rapidly. Check the progress of the projects Engineer Wang and Sister Lee from the IT department are currently responsible for. See if there is any risk of delay. A few days later, tea time. Sue Wang was facing her computer, racking her brains to compile her 8th research report, feeling as if her soul had left her body. Suddenly, a large bouquet of red roses, passionate to the point of arrogance, slammed against her computer screen with a thud. Delicate and dripping with beauty, the petals still bore fresh water droplets, and a rich rose scent domineeringly filled the entire cubicle. At a glance, there were at least 99 of them. Wow! The entire IT department instantly boiled over with excitement. The sound of coding stopped. Every head turned in unison, eyes focusing on Sue Wang and that enormous bouquet of red roses which exploded with presents. Sue Wang, confess immediately. Who sent them? Such a big gesture. 99 Bulgarian air-flown roses, surely. OMG. So romantic. Wan, you've been hiding this deep. Sue Wang was stunned too. She looked at the exquisite card tucked into the bouquet, her heart pounding wildly. Could it be him? Impossible. An iceberg sending roses? That image was too terrifying. She dared not imagine it. Her trembling hand pulled out the card. On it was the same familiar, vigorous handwriting. This time, there was only a short sentence. How does the report progress? The signature line remained blank. Sue Wang. A rush of anger shot straight to her forehead. Romantic? Romantic my ass. This was clearly a naked threat plus mockery. It was more like a death warrant. Asking how the report progress is? He might as well just hold a knife to her neck and ask. Sue Wang's small face flushed red with anger. Looking at those dazzling, eye-piercing red roses, then at the colleagues' gossipy and blessing-filled gazes, she felt the flowers were scorching hot to the touch. Oh, everyone, don't misunderstand. Sue Wang stood up abruptly, plastering an extremely exaggerated smile on her face and raising her voice an octave. These flowers were actually sent by President Lin. Cough, cough, cough. Instantly, sounds of people choking on their own saliva rang out all around. The expressions on the colleagues' faces instantly shifted from gossipy excitement to horror and disbelief, looking as if they had collectively swallowed flies. President Lin? Sending flowers? To an intern? And red roses? 99 of them. This was harder to accept than the end of the world. Facing everyone's petrified gazes, Sue Wang continued to drop bombshells. Her voice was crisp and loud, ensuring every corner could hear. President Lin said, "This is a consolation for all our colleagues in the IT department for working overtime and working hard recently, especially for everyone who has poured their heart and blood into the Mirage project. 1 flower per person. Everyone gets a share. Come, don't be polite. Help yourselves." As she spoke, moving as efficiently as someone handing out flyers, she pulled the bright red roses out of the huge bouquet, one by one, and involuntarily stuffed them into the hands of the colleagues nearest to her. "Sister Zhao here. Thank you for your hard work. Engineer Wang, take it. A token of President Lin's regard. Brotherly, don't just stand there. Catch." Holding the single roses that symbolized President Lin's regards, the colleagues' expressions were a spectacular sight to behold. It was as if they were cupping red-hot branding irons. They couldn't throw them away, yet they dared not hold them either. They stood frozen in place, utterly disheveled in the wind. Sue Wang, meanwhile, clutched the remaining bouquet, now obviously much sparser, and with a brilliant smile on her face, while screaming frantically inside. She shook it vigorously and triumphantly at the surveillance camera in the corner. "Linyu, I've shared your flowers on your behalf. Consider your consolation bonus saved." Chapter 8. Weekend Raid, the Top Floor Office. On the surveillance screen before Linyu, Sue Wang's smug face, practically screaming "Bite me," was clearly displayed. along with a pitiful bunch of red roses in her arms that had been plucked half-bald. He held a cup of black coffee, steam curling around the rim. Watching that little woman on the screen, bold enough to borrow flowers to offer Buddha, using his name to turn his regards, threats, into departmental welfare. The corners of Lin Yu's lips slowly, ever so slowly, curved upward. This time, it wasn't a cold arc, nor was it a faint smile laced with malice. It was a genuine smile, one tinged with helplessness, yet harboring intense interest and indulgence. A smile extremely rare for him. He lifted the coffee and took a sip. The bitter liquid slid down his throat. His thumb habitually rubbed the cold band on his ring finger. Su-won. She had forgotten the past, yet she could still so easily stir up these frozen waters. Friday, closing time. A relaxed atmosphere of finally liberated permeated the technical department. Su-won let out a long sigh and carefully placed the 10th fresh out of the oven user research report, still warm from the printer, into her folder. Done. 10 great mountains. She had finally moved them all. She felt physically drained, but her spirit was abnormally high. Tomorrow was the weekend. She was going to sleep until the end of time. Humming an off-key tune, she packed her backpack and walked briskly toward the elevator hall. Her mind was already debating whether to stay in and binge-watch shows or go out for a feast to reward herself. The elevator doors opened with a ding. Su-won had just stepped inside when a familiar, overwhelmingly oppressive and chilly aura washed over her. She looked up, and her heart stopped. Lin Yu. He stood in the center of the elevator, his posture as upright as a pine. A dark gray suit jacket was draped casually over the crook of his arm, revealing a crisp white shirt underneath. The top button was undone, shedding some of his usual cold rigidity, but adding a touch of languid. Danger. He was looking down at his phone, his side profile looking exceptionally sharp under the overhead light. In a confined space, there was nothing but the faint, cool scent of cedar clinging to him, and the sound of Su-won's own heart pounding like a war drum. Su-won froze at the door, neither entering nor retreating. A strong sense of crisis, like a small animal stumbling into the territory of an apex predator, seized her. Lin Yu seemed to sense someone's presence and looked up. His deep gaze landed on Su-won, carrying a trace of imperceptible scrutiny as it swept over her instantly frozen expression and slightly widened eyes. Off work, he spoke, his voice sounding exceptionally low in the enclosed space, devoid of emotion. Why, yes. Yes, President Lin. Su-won answered bracingly, like a primary school student called on by a teacher. She quickly shrank into the furthest corner of the elevator, wishing she could embed herself into the stainless steel wall. She lowered her head, pretending to study the button panel, praying frantically in her heart. Don't look at me. Don't look at me. Just pretend I don't exist. The elevator doors slowly slid shut and began to descend. In a narrow space, the air felt so thick it was almost impossible to breathe. Su-won could clearly hear the roar of her own heartbeat. Did you finish the reports? Lin Yu's voice sounded again, breaking the suffocating silence. He continued to stare at the mirror-like elevator doors ahead, his tone as flat as if he were discussing the weather. Fine. Finished. 10 copies. They're all in the bag. Su-won answered immediately, her voice floating slightly from nerves. Guaranteed. Quality and quantity. She subconsciously gripped her backpack's straps tighter, as if they were a lifeline. Amen. Lin Yu responded faintly and said no more. The elevator descended smoothly, the numbers changing steadily. For Su-won, seconds felt like years. She only hoped to reach the first floor quickly. Just as the elevator was about to reach the ground floor, and Su-won secretly breathed a sigh of relief, preparing to dash out the moment the doors opened. Ding! The elevator stopped at a certain floor. The doors opened. Outside stood several employees from other departments, talking and laughing as they prepared to enter. The moment they looked up and saw Lin Yu standing inside, the smiles on their faces instantly solidified, as if someone had hit the pause button. The air went instantly silent. Lin Yu remained expressionless, his gaze sweeping over them indifferently. It was as if those employees had been swept by an invisible chill. They all stepped back in unison, plastering extremely unnatural smiles filled with obsequiousness and awe onto their faces, and spoke with one voice. President Lin, please, you go first. We'll wait for the next one. No rush. No rush at all. Having said this, they very consciously and with synchronized movements pressed the button outside to close the elevator doors. Under Su Wan's despairing gaze, the elevator doors slowly slid shut again. It cut off the outside world and severed her last hope of escape. In the narrow space, it was just her and Lin Yu again. Su Wan felt that her back was already soaked through with sweat. She kept her head obstinately lowered, staring at the tips of her shoes, wishing she could vanish right there and then. Are you afraid of me? Lin Yu's voice suddenly rang out, very close. It carried a note of playful scrutiny. Su Wan started violently. She subconsciously looked up, only to crash right into his deep, bottomless eyes. That gaze seemed to have hooks in it, capable of seeing right through a person's heart. And no, Su Wan denied it flatly, her voice rising in pitch due to her guilty conscience, sounding particularly jarring. President Lin, you are approachable. Amiable. Everyone respects you very much. She racked her brains for complimentary words, wanting to slap her own mouth as soon as she said them. Approachable? Amiable? She didn't even believe it herself. Watching her panicked, dodging eyes and flushed cheeks, the corners of Lin Yu's mouth curled up almost imperceptibly. The arc was extremely slight, yet like a stone thrown into a cold pool, it sent out subtle ripples. Is that so? His tone lifted slightly, and he turned his body slightly toward her. That oppressive scent of cold cedar enveloped her even more distinctly. He leaned forward slightly, closing the distance. His voice dropped lower, carrying an indescribable magnetism as it drilled clearly into Su Wan's ears. Then why? Every time you see me, is it like a rabbit seeing an eagle? Boom! Su Wan's face instantly exploded in red. All the blood rushed to the top of her head. Her ears were buzzing. He was too close. So close she could even see the curve of his thick eyelashes and see that hint of wicked amusement deep in his eyes. A rabbit seeing an eagle? What kind of lousy metaphor was that? A massive wave of humiliation and the embarrassment of being seen through instantly drowned her. The string called reason, snap, broke. Ooh, who's a rabbit? Su Wan didn't know where she found the courage, but she stiffened her neck and jerked her head up. With eyes exceptionally bright from indignation, she glared fiercely back at him, her voice trembling with a reckless abandon. Lin Yu, don't you go too far. I finished the reports. 10 copies. Not a single word missing. Don't you think about picking holes just to deduct my internship points? She roared this all out in one breath, her chest heaving violently, looking just like a little hedgehog that had been thoroughly provoked and had bristled all its spines. Seeing her bristling like this, the amusement in Lin Yu's eyes deepened. Not only was he not angry, he actually seemed pleased. He straightened up unhurriedly, creating a little distance, and leisurely admired her flushed cheeks and eyes that sparkled from anger. Oh, he drew out the syllable, his gaze circling her face as if appreciating some interesting scenery. You got some nerve. You're the first intern who dares to call the boss by his full name. Su Wan felt her scalp tingle under his scrutiny. The courage she had just mustered leaked away quickly like a punctured balloon. It's over, I stepped on a landmine again. She wanted to bite off her tongue in vexation. Just then, ding, a crisp sound like music from heaven. The first floor, the elevator doors slowly opened. Su Wan felt as if she had been granted a general amnesty. Ignoring whether he was the boss or not, escaping was all that mattered. Like a cannonball fired from a chamber, she ducked her head and charged toward the open elevator doors with all her might. Goodbye, President Lin. Leaving behind this tearful farewell, she plunged headfirst into the crowd in the lobby without looking back. Her retreating figure so panic-stricken it looked as if a ghost were chasing her. Lin Yu stood where he was, watching that slender figure flee in defeat and instantly vanish into the crowd, until the elevator doors slowly slid shut, transforming back into a smooth, bright mirror. The mirror reflected his face at that moment. The upward curve of his lips was clearly visible. It was no longer a cold mockery, nor a wicked smirk, but a Genuine smile, tinged with helplessness, yet harboring intense interest and indulgence. He raised his hand, his thumb once again stroking the cold platinum ring on his ring finger, feeling the raised letters on the inner band. Suwon, this little wildcat with amnesia. Her claws are quite sharp. 9. The light of an idol. Saturday morning, sunlight filtered through the sheer curtains, casting warm patches of light on the floor. In her rental apartment, Suwon rolled around on her soft little bed, sleeping dead to the world. A full week of high-intensity overtime and the torment of 10 different reports left her in desperate need of a deep sleep to restore her vitality. In her dream, there was no code, no reports, and definitely not that iceberg face that could freeze a person stiff. There was only peace and serenity. Buzz, 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 buzz. The piercing vibration of her phone was like an electric drill, rudely puncturing the bubble of her sweet dream. Suwon frowned, burying her head deeper into the pillow with impatience, trying to block out the annoying noise. It was no use. The vibration was unrelenting, dancing madly on a nightstand with a persistence that vowed not to stop until it achieved its goal. Who is it? This early in the morning. Suwon groaned painfully. Eyes closed, her hand fumbled around on the nightstand until she finally grabbed the culprit making the noise. She struggled to open one eye and looked at the screen through a sleepy haze. Flashing on the screen was a landline number not saved in her contacts, yet unusually familiar. The direct line to the CEO's office at Hwanja Tech. Suwon's sleepiness was scared away instantly. She bolted upright in bed with a jolt, her heart pounding wildly. Linyu? Why was he calling her on a Saturday? Could there be a problem with the reports? Did he want her to drag herself back immediately to redo them? She took a deep breath and, with the tragic resolve of a warrior facing death, pressed the answer button. Her voice was still thick with sleep and caution. Hello, Mr. Lin. There was silence on the other end for 2 seconds. Then, a low, steady voice void of any emotion came through, striking clearly against Suwon's eardrums. Intern Su, an urgent client meeting has come up. We need core members of the project team present for support. You have 30 minutes. Be downstairs at the office. Boom. Suwon felt as if a bolt of lightning had struck the top of her skull out of nowhere. Saturday morning, 30 minutes. To the office. Mr. Lin. Suwon's voice instantly pitched higher, laced with tearful disbelief. Today is Saturday. It's a legal holiday. And core members? I'm just an intern. Intern. Lin Yu's voice paused on the other end. Immediately after, Suwon clearly heard a faint, metallic click, like the sound of a lighter flicking open. Then he spoke slowly, in a tone so outrageously matter-of-fact it made one's blood boil. Who told you that an intern's weekend doesn't belong to the company? Suwon clutched her phone, petrified in the morning sunlight. Only 3 words were frantically scrolling through her mind. Lin, the Skinner. 10. The return of Lin the Skinner, half an hour later. At the entrance of the Hwanja Tech building, a sleek, jet-black Maybach S680, reflecting a cold metallic sheen under the sun, sat quietly by the roadside like a dormant beast. The windows were tinted dark, blocking all prying eyes from the outside. With her hair blown into a mess and barely tied back, wearing a hastily grabbed t-shirt and jeans and canvas shoes on her feet, Suwon rushed to the building entrance, panting and looking utterly defeated. She spotted the incredibly conspicuous luxury car at a glance, as well as the side profile revealed when the driver's window rolled down, a face of unrivaled beauty, yet one that made her grind her teeth in hatred. Lin Yu rested one hand casually on the steering wheel, a lit cigarette between his fingertips. Pale blue smoke curled upward, blurring parts of his sharp, cold profile. He turned his head slightly, his deep gaze piercing through the smoke to land precisely on the figure at the entrance, who looked as wilted and dejected as a frostbitten cabbage. He lifted his wrist, glanced at his expensive watch, and then let his gaze fall back on his Suwon with unabashed scrutiny and a hint of disdain. You're late. 7 minutes. He spoke, his voice drifting through the cool morning air, devoid of warmth. Suwon nearly choked on her breath. 30 minutes. From her rental in the suburbs to the city center. She had practically scrambled all the way here, paying a painful surge price on a ride-hailing app just to secure a car. She didn't even know if they had run any red lights. And he still had the nerve to complain she was late. Mr. Lin, 30 minutes is really... She tried to defend herself. Get in. Lin Yu interrupted her, his tone leaving no room for argument. He stubbed out the cigarette and tossed it into the car's ashtray. Su-won looked at the door, which seemed to symbolize the gate to a capitalist's luxury cage, and fought an internal battle. Resist? She didn't dare. Get in? She was unwilling. Finally, crushed by the capitalist's powerful aura, her small shoulders slumped. Resigning herself to fate, she dawdled over to the car, pulled open the rear door, and crawled inside like a browbeaten victim. The car door slammed shut with a bang, cutting off the outside world. Instantly, the cabin was filled with a crisp, cold scent of cedar mixed with the faint, lingering smell of tobacco, enveloping her in an overbearing manner. The car started smoothly, merging into the sparse weekend morning traffic. Su-won curled up in the farthest corner of the back seat, trying her best to minimize her presence. Her eyes were fixed on the rapidly receding streetscape outside the window, while in her mind, she cursed the man driving up front 100 times over. The car drove past the bustling commercial district, but didn't stop at any office buildings. Instead, it headed toward the suburbs. The buildings on both sides of the road became sparser, and the greenery grew denser. The doubts in Su-won's heart grew larger. An important client meeting? In the suburbs? Mr. Lin, she finally couldn't hold back, asking cautiously, Where exactly are we going for this meeting? The man in the front seat glanced at her through the rearview mirror, his gaze behind the lenses deep and unreadable. You'll know when we get there. Concise as always, offering absolutely no information. Su-won, fine, you're the boss. You call the shots. The car finally entered an extremely quiet and elegant area. Amidst the sheltering trees, several uniquely designed buildings with a distinct therapeutic style were partially visible. The air was filled with the scent of grass and trees and a sense of tranquility. Was this that top-tier private sanatorium in the suburbs? Su-won was even more bewildered. Bringing her to a sanatorium for a client meeting? Lin Yu parked the car in front of a small building covered in green vines. He got out, walked around to the back seat, and opened the door for Su-won. Get out. Su-won followed him into the small building, full of suspicion. The interior decor featured warm wood tones, soft lighting, and a faint scent of medicinal herbs drifting through the air. It was so quiet she could hear her own heartbeat. Nurses and doctors in simple, elegant uniforms moved silently back and forth. No matter how she looked at it, this didn't seem like a place for a business meeting. Lin Yu seemed very familiar with the place, leading her straight through the quiet corridor to the outside of a spacious, bright rehabilitation room. Through the huge floor-to-ceiling glass windows, she could see various pieces of professional rehabilitation equipment arranged inside. An elderly gentleman wearing loose sportswear, with gray hair but looking hale and hearty, was earnestly doing balance training under the guidance of a therapist. His movements were somewhat slow, but very steady. When Su-won saw the old gentleman's face clearly, she felt as if she had been struck by lightning. She covered her mouth abruptly to stop herself from screaming. Young, Professor Young, she cried out involuntarily, her voice distorted by shock. Professor Yang Xinghua, the titan of the domestic artificial intelligence field, her most worshipped idol during university. The inspiration for her graduation thesis topic had come from one of Professor Yang's early works. She had only heard that Professor Yang injured his leg in an accident a few years ago and had been recuperating, rarely making public appearances. How could he be here? Lin Yu brought her to see Professor Yang. Lin Yu stood beside her, his gaze resting on the focused elderly man in the rehabilitation room, his eyes holding a rare trace of warmth and respect. Elder Yang is the most important technical consultant for our Mirage project and also one of the biggest investors. His voice was low and steady, exceptionally clear in the quiet corridor. He's recovering well, and recently he wanted to understand the progress of the project's core components, specifically the application model of the dynamic emotional algorithm in user immersion experiences. He paused, turning his gaze to Su-won, who was beside him, completely petrified with her mouth wide enough to fit an egg. The core architecture and preliminary test data for this model, he said, looking at her eyes, which were round with shock and disbelief, the corners of his mouth lifting in an extremely tiny, barely perceptible arc, were done by you. Boom! Suwon's brain completely crashed. She did it. That dynamic emotional algorithm, model she had pulled countless all-nighters for, lost handfuls of hair over, and was scolded mercilessly by Lin Yu for, only to be forced to redo it countless times. It was, for Professor Yang to see, it was the core of the Mirage project. A massive wave of shock drowned her like a tsunami, followed immediately by overwhelming panic. Mr. Lin. Suwon suddenly grabbed Lin Yu's arm, her fingers turning white from the force, her voice shaking uncontrollably. No, absolutely not. My model, it's just a semi-finished product. There's still so many bugs I haven't fixed. The logic isn't fully self-consistent either. Show it to Professor Yang? That's too humiliating. I'll be nailed to the pillar of academic shame. I beg you, Mr. Lin, send someone else. Engineer Zhao. Engineer Wang. They are all 100 times better than me. She was rambling incoherently, so anxious that tears were about to spill out. Losing face in front of her idol? That was worse than death. Lin Yu looked down, glancing at her hand, tightly gripping his arm. The girl's fingers were slender. Her grip was so tight that her fingernails had turned white. He could clearly feel the slight tremor running through her body and the immense panic radiating from her. He raised his eyes and looked at her. That small face, usually so full of vitality or a hint of sly playfulness, was now filled only with pure, unadulterated fear and pleading, like a shivering fawn driven to the edge of a cliff. Lin Yu's gaze was bottomless. He remained silent for a few seconds. Just as Suwon thought he was about to utter another cold rejection, he slowly raised his hand. His movements were a bit unfamiliar, perhaps even stiff, as he gently patted her on the shoulder, which was tight with tension. It was very light, like the brush of a feather. Yet, the heavy sense of power transmitted through his warm palm acted like a faint electric current, instantly piercing through Suwon's panic. What are you afraid of? His voice was low and steady, carrying a strange, soothing power as it fell clearly into Suwon's ears. You built the model. The concept is yours. No one knows its framework and potential better than you. His gaze was sharp yet composed, looking straight into Suwon's panicked eyes as if trying to inject his own certainty into them. What Professor Yang wants to see isn't a flawless finished product, but a living idea and a direction for iteration. He paused, his tone carrying an unquestionable certainty and perhaps even a hint of encouragement. Suwon, speak your mind boldly. If the sky falls, I'm here. Suwon stared at him blankly. She looked at the quiet, convincing power in his deep eyes. She listened to the warmth and support in his words, something she had never heard from him before. She felt the lingering, heavy weight of that light pat on her shoulder. If the sky falls, I'm here. These 6 words seemed to hold magic, instantly dispelling the stormy seas churning within her, leaving behind only an incredible, sunlit calm. The panic receded like the tide, replaced by a strange emotion, sour yet scorching hot, that quietly welled up in her heart and quickly filled her entire chest. She sniffled and blinked hard, forcing back the untimely moisture in her eyes. When she looked at Lin Yu again, the panic in her eyes had faded, replaced by a burn-the-bridges determination and a kindled light. She let go of his arm, straightened her back, and like a small blade of grass suddenly tensed against a strong wind, she turned to face the sunlight. Okay. She nodded vigorously. Her voice wasn't loud, but it was exceptionally clear and strong. I'll say it. The door to the rehabilitation room was gently pushed open. Hearing the noise, Professor Yang Jinghua stopped what he was doing and, supported by a therapist, slowly turned around. When his gaze landed on Suwon, who was walking in behind Lin Yu, it held the scholarly warmth and a hint of inquiry characteristic of an academic. Lin, who is this? Professor Yang's voice was peaceful, carrying the kindness of an elder. Lin Yu stepped slightly to the side, making room. His tone carried a rare solemnity. Professor Yang, this is Suwon. She is a core member of our Mirage project team and the chief architect of the dynamic emotion algorithm model. Suwon's heart skipped a beat. Core member, chief architect. These heavy words coming from Lin, you made her feel a little dizzy, but even more so, gave her a sense of heavy responsibility being entrusted to her. She took a deep breath, stepped forward, and bowed respectfully to the idol she had only ever seen in textbooks and news reports. Hello, Professor Yang. I am Suwon. It is a great honor to meet you. Oh, Professor Yang smiled gently, sizing up the girl before him who looked quite young, even a bit student-like. His eyes held a bit more interest now. Dynamic emotion algorithm? Lin mentioned to me before that there was a young person with very cutting-edge ideas. It seems that's you? Don't be nervous. Sit down and chat. Just treat it as this old man discussing things with you. He pointed to the lounge sofa nearby. Lin Yu gave Su one extremely faint, almost imperceptible glance, signaling her to relax. The next hour or so was like a cleansing and tempering of the soul for Suwon. The initial nervousness was inevitable, and her voice trembled slightly. But when the topic truly cut into the algorithm model she had poured her heart and blood into, polished repeatedly and all but carved in her bones, those complex logics, exquisite architectures, bottlenecks encountered, and unconstrained solutions surged from her mouth, fluent, clear, and possessing a life of their own, carried by a self-forgetful passion. She spoke rapidly. When reaching key points, she even forgot that sitting opposite her was a titan of the field, forgot that her Linda Skinner boss was sitting right next to her. Her eyes shone incredibly bright, and her hands gestured unconsciously, attempting to visualize those abstract code logics. She was no longer that little intern crushed by 10 reports, no longer that little rabbit shivering in the elevator. At this moment, she was radiant, like a star that had finally been wiped free of dust to burst forth with dazzling light. Professor Yang listened with extreme seriousness, occasionally raising a few critical questions from sharp angles that cut straight to the core. Every question made Suwon's heart tighten, but immediately after, her deep-seated thoughts on the model and those unformed optimization ideas were miraculously triggered by these queries. Inspiration sputtered like sparks, making her answers even more profound and forward-looking. The sensation of being enlightened by her idol and having her train of thought suddenly clear up made her cheeks flush with excitement. Lin Yu sat quietly to the side the entire time, like the most steady backdrop. He didn't interrupt, only casting a calm glance whenever Suwon briefly stumbled over a difficulty, or giving the slightest nod after she explained a key point. He was more like a silent guardian, a steady anchor, providing voiceless yet solid support amidst the storm of her thoughts. When Suwon finally finished explaining the last optimization direction and stopped, parched, a brief silence fell over the rehabilitation room. Professor Yang leaned back on the sofa, fingers lightly tapping the armrest, wearing a profound expression of deep thought. Sunlight streamed through the window, landing on his graying hair. Suwon's heart instantly leaped to her throat, her fingers unconsciously twisting the hem of her clothes. She looked at Lin Yu uneasily, but he just gave her a calm look that said, "Be patient." A few seconds later, Professor Yang slowly raised his head. His gaze landed on Suwon, no longer with gentle inquiry, but with an undisguised, sharp light of surprise and high appreciation. "Good. Very good." Professor Yang's voice boomed, carrying the excitement of discovering an uncut gem. "Bold ideas, novel architecture, especially that asymmetrical emotional feedback loop you proposed. It cleverly avoids the linear constraints of traditional models. Very inspiring. And that optimization direction based on dream fragment analysis you mentioned at the end." Suwon, his gaze toward her was full of approval. The younger generation is truly to be reckoned with, truly formidable. He turned to Lin Yu, beaming. "Shaolin, you scouted this core member well. You have a keen eye. This girl has a bright future." Immense joy, like a warm tide, instantly drowned Suwon. Affirmation from her idol, and such high praise at that. She was so excited her cheeks turned red, her eyes shining as if filled with stars. For a moment, she didn't know what to say, so she could only bow repeatedly. Thank you, Professor Yang. Thank you. I will definitely keep working hard. Lin Yu stood up, a faint smile on his face as well, and nodded slightly to Professor Yang. You flatter us, Elder Yang. It is she who has the potential herself. Coming out of the sanatorium, they sat back in the black Maybach. The cabin was still filled with the crisp scent of cedar, but the atmosphere was completely different. Su Wan was still immersed in immense excitement and agitation. Her cheeks flushed, the corners of her mouth uncontrollably turning up, like a little bear that had stolen 10 pounds of honey. President Lin, did you hear that? Professor Yang praised me. He said my ideas were bold, my architecture novel, that I have a boundless future. She couldn't help but turn to look at the man in the driver's seat, her voice chirping with joy, her eyes sparkling. Lin Yu started the car and drove smoothly out of the sanatorium gates. Through the rearview mirror, he glanced at the girl in the back seat who was so excited she was about to dance. Sunlight spilled through the window onto her bright, smiling face. Those eyes were filled with pure joy and brilliance, even more dazzling than the sun outside. His fingers gripping the steering wheel tapped lightly once. His mouth, at an angle Su Wan couldn't see, curved into a distinct and soft arc. Ma'am, I heard. His voice remained low, yet it lacked some of its usual cold hardness, carrying a trace of imperceptible warmth. So, intern Su, he changed the subject, his tone carrying a familiar intonation belonging to Lin the Skinner. For Monday's 10 reports, can they be submitted with a bit more depth? The smile on Su Wan's face froze instantly. The tiny bit of gratitude she had just barely mustered for the capitalist vanished in an instant. As expected, a capitalist is a capitalist. The essence of exploitation never changes. She turned her head away, puffing out her cheeks, ground her teeth at the scenery rapidly retreating outside the window, and muttered under her breath. Slave driver. Her voice was faint, but in the quiet carriage, it was clearly audible. Lin Yu looked through the rearview mirror at the pouting profile reflected there, and the amusement in his eyes spread silently. 11. The tenderness beneath the iceberg. Days slipped by amidst busyness, exploitation, intermittent outbursts of frustration, and occasional, unexpected surprises. At Phantom Tech, especially under the special care of Big Boss Lin, Su Wan was growing at rocket speed. Her feelings toward that iceberg boss on the top floor were as complex as a tangled ball of yarn. Teeth-gritting hatred, mainly directed at the endless reports, mixed with a tiny bit of gratitude for being recognized, limited only to the Professor Yang incident, and an indescribable awkwardness that arose from being teased every now and then. For example, when she worked overtime late into the night, famished and sighing over instant noodles, a beautifully packaged, steaming portion of high-end Japanese cuisine or nourishing soup would magically appear on her desk. There was no card, but she knew who it was even if she thought with her toes. Or for instance, when she was driven to the brink of madness by a technical problem, pulling her hair out in the break room, the next day her inbox would receive an anonymous email containing several precise, highly inspiring, and sometimes even unpublished frontier research papers. The intention was so clear that it was hard for her to play dumb. And then there was President Zhang, that greasy client who loved to get handsy under the guise of work. Recently, he had suddenly become exceptionally well-behaved. Not only did he cancel all unnecessary meetings, but even during a project alignment call, she could feel his trepidation and caution through the phone line. Su Wan seriously suspected there was an invisible hand operating behind the scenes. This feeling of being covered from all angles, with no blind spots, yet in an extremely secretive manner, made the ball of yarn in Su Wan's heart tangle even tighter. While she enjoyed the convenience brought by this special treatment, she also felt incredibly awkward about this ambiguous care, especially every time she accidentally met Lin Yu in the elevator or corridor. His businesslike, frosty demeanor, as if nothing had happened, made her feel stifled. What exactly did he mean? What did he take her for? Squeeze the life out of her when he needed to exploit her, and toss her a bone when he was in a good mood? This awkward and anxious emotion reached its peak late one night while working overtime. Su Wan finished the last piece of code at hand, rubbed her sore eyes, and looked at the time in the bottom right corner of the screen, 1:30 a.m. The entire technical department had long been empty. Only the solitary lamp at her station remained lit. She was tired and hungry. She sighed and habitually glanced at her desk. It was empty. No mysterious takeout tonight. A subtle sense of disappointment quietly slid across her heart, but she immediately suppressed it by force. What are you thinking? Do you really expect a capitalist to be charitable every day? She packed her things and dragged her exhausted body toward the elevator lobby. The building was terribly quiet late at night. Only her own footsteps echoed in the empty corridor. The elevator descended slowly. Ding! The doors opened on the first floor. Suwon walked out with her head down, her mind still mulling over a small optimization for the code she just wrote. Just a few steps out of the corner of her eye, she seemed to glimpse a familiar car parked in the shadows to the side of the building entrance. The black body almost blended into the night under the dim streetlights, but that sleek, domineering silhouette and the striking hood ornament. It was Lin Yu's Maybach. So late, and he hasn't left yet. Or, did he just get back? Suwon's footsteps paused subconsciously. Inexplicably, she didn't walk directly toward the main gate, but lightened her steps and, using a giant potted plant at the entrance as cover, quietly edged in that direction. The car window was rolled down halfway. She saw Lin Yu. He was leaning back in the driver's seat, his head slightly tilted up, eyes closed. The dim light of the street lamp slanted across his chiseled profile, outlining his deep features. Between his brows sat a fatigue so thick it couldn't dissolve, and there were faint dark circles under his eyes. One hand rested on the steering wheel, and the other was actually holding a tablet. The screen was still emitting a faint glow. Suwon's heart felt like it had been gently bumped by something. So icebergs get tired too. And tired like this, yet still reading documents. Just then, a cool night breeze blew past. Achoo! An unexpected sneeze broke the silence of the late night. Suwon was scared out of her wits. She instinctively covered her mouth. Crap! Exposed. Sure enough, inside the car, Lin Yu's eyes snapped open instantly. In the dim light, those profound eyes were like cold stars suddenly ignited, sharp, alert, and sweeping with precision toward the potted plant where Suwon was hiding. I'm done for. Suwon wailed internally, wishing the ground would just open up and swallow her whole. She stood frozen in place like a stalker caught in the act, uncertain whether to flee or stay put. The car window rolled all the way down. Lin Yu's gaze cut through the gloom, locking firmly onto the stiff figure behind the potted plant. His face was expressionless, save for a slight furrow of his brows that suggested the annoyance of being disturbed and a trace of curiosity. Suwon. His voice held the slight huskiness of a sleepless night, sounding exceptionally clear in the silence. Bracing herself, Suwon dawdled out from behind the plant, head lowered like a child who had done something wrong. Lin, President Lin. I just got off work. I was passing by. Her voice trailed off, lacking all conviction. Seeing her burying her head in the sand like an ostrich, Lin Yu's frown deepened, and his voice turned cold. This late? Overtime again. His tone carried obvious disapproval. The project. Wrapping up the project. Suwon defended in a whisper. Lin Yu didn't say another word. He just stared at her. His gaze felt heavy, making Suwon's scalp tingle. Just as Suwon thought he was about to lose his temper and lecture her, he suddenly pushed open the car door, stepped out with his long legs, and got off. His tall figure, carrying the chill of the night wind and a faint, cold scent of cedar, instantly overshadowed Suwon. She instinctively took a small step back. Lin Yu walked straight up to her, close enough that Suwon could clearly see the red veins in his eyes. He said nothing. He simply took off the dark gray cashmere coat he was wearing. With the warmth and scent of his body still on it, the high-quality cashmere coat was wrapped around Suwon with an irresistible force. His movements were somewhat stiff, perhaps even a bit rough, as if he were completing a task. Warmth instantly enveloped Suwon's body, which had been chilled by the night wind, and his unique, crisp cedar scent aggressively invaded her senses. Suwon was completely dumbfounded, her mind a blank. She froze in place like a statue under a spell. Lin Yu didn't seem to find anything inappropriate about his actions. Having done all this, he didn't even glance at Sue Wan's instantly flushing cheeks or her wide, staring eyes. He turned, pulled open the passenger door, and spat out two concise words, "Get in." The car cruised smoothly through the silent city streets late at night. Streetlight filtered through the windows, casting flickering shadows inside the cabin. Sue Wan, wrapped in the cashmere coat that was far too large for her, curled up in the passenger seat like a child who had stolen an adult's clothes. The lingering body heat and the crisp cedar scent on the coat enveloped her completely, making her stiffen, afraid to move a muscle. Her cheeks were burning hot, and her heart beat so fast it felt like it might burst out her chest. She stole a glance at the man in the driver's seat. Lin Yu was focused on the road ahead, his side profile looking cold and chiseled amidst the interplay of light and shadow. He seemed exhausted, with fatigue lingering between his brows that he couldn't shake off, yet his hands gripping the steering wheel remained steady and powerful. The car was quiet, save for the low hum of the engine. That sudden, domineering gesture of draping the coat was like a stone thrown into the lake of her heart, stirring up ripples that refused to settle. The awkwardness, anxiety, and the resentment she had accumulated earlier were, in this moment, scattered by a stronger, more chaotic emotion. What on earth does he mean? Not a word was spoken the entire way. The car eventually stopped downstairs at the old apartment complex where Sue Wan rented a place. The streetlights were dim, the tree shadows dancing. Sue Wan felt as if a heavy burden had been lifted. She fumbled to unbuckle her seatbelt, desperate to escape this small, suffocating space that made her heart panic. "Thank you, President Lin," she said quickly, reaching out to open the door. "Wait." Lin Yu's voice wasn't loud, but it froze her hand on the door handle instantly. Sue Wan's heart leaped in her throat again as she stiffly turned her head. Lin Yu wasn't looking at her. His gaze was fixed on the dim streetlight outside the window, his fingers unconsciously tapping on the steering wheel. His profile looked exceptionally deep in the shadows. He seemed somewhat hesitant. For the decisive President Lin, this was an absolutely unprecedented emotion. The car fell once again into a subtle, viscous silence. The air seemed to stop flowing. Sue Wan held her breath, feeling every second drag on like a century. What is he going to say? Scold me for working too late? Or is it? Just as Sue Wan was about to be driven mad by the silence, Lin Yu finally turned his head slowly. His gaze, heavy and almost tangible, landed squarely on Sue Wan's face. In those deep eyes, the sharpness usually present when he scrutinized documents was gone, as was the wicked, teasing mirth he displayed in the elevator. All that remained was an indescribable complexity and focus. It was as if he were looking through her, searching for something, or perhaps confirming something. He looked at her, watching for a long, long time. Long enough that Sue Wan could almost hear the sound of her own blood rushing through her veins. Then he let out an extremely soft, barely audible sigh. The sigh was faint, yet it seemed to carry a crushing weight as it landed upon the tip of Sue Wan's heart. He reached out his hand, not to pat her shoulder or back as he had at the sanatorium. Instead, he reached directly toward her cheek. His fingertips, cool and rough with thin calluses, brushed extremely gently and carefully past a strand of hair at her temple that had been messed up by the night breeze. His movements were as slow and gentle as if he were handling a rare treasure, carrying a kind of near-pious reverence. The warmth of his fingertips transmitted through her skin, bringing a faint sensation of electric current. Sue Wan's body trembled violently. It was as if a freezing spell had been cast on her. She froze in place, her breathing stalling completely. Her mind went blank, leaving only the cool touch at her temple, infinitely amplified. Lin Yu's gaze grew even deeper along with the movement of his fingertips. He gazed at her smooth temple, his look so focused it bordered on greed, as if he were caressing a memory lost and found, filled with a thickness that could not be dissolved, of attachment and pain. "Right here." His low voice sounded in the quiet car, carrying a dreamlike huskiness, as soft as a whisper. "Before, there was a small scar from falling off a bike. How come? It's gone." His fingertips, filled with immense pity and a lost sort of bewilderment, rubbed gently and repeatedly over the smooth skin of her temple. as if there really should be a unique mark there belonging to Soo-won. Soo-won froze completely. The blood in her entire body seemed to rush to the top of her head in that instant, only to freeze in ice the next second. The spot on her temple touched by his fingertips felt like it had been seared by a branding iron, the burning sensation spreading instantly to her whole body. However, what made her soul tremble even more than the touch was the content of his words. A scar? From falling off a bike? Her temple? No. From childhood to adulthood, her forehead had been perfectly smooth. She had hardly even had a pimple there. How could an extremely absurd, yet fatally attractive notion split through her chaotic mind like lightning, instantly illuminating all the details ignored during this period, all the inexplicable familiarity, all the complex emotions in his eyes. Bang! The loud sound of the door closing was exceptionally piercing in the quiet night. As if chased by an evil spirit, Soo-won used all her strength to push the car door open and charged into the dim stairwell without looking back. Her footsteps were staggering, her retreating figure panic-stricken. She did not look back. So, she did not see, after she fled, that black Maybach remained quietly in place, not leaving for a long time. The window rolled down. Lin Yu leaned back in the driver's seat, a lit cigarette between his fingers. The scarlet spark flickered in the darkness, illuminating the obscure silhouette of his side profile. He gazed at the window belonging to Sue, one that had long since vanished into the depths of the dark stairwell, his eyes sinking as deep as undissolvable thick ink. The night breeze blew past, ruffling the bangs of his forehead to reveal a deep furrow between his brows. After a long while, he raised his hand, took a harsh drag on the cigarette, and then forcefully extinguished the butt in the car's ashtray. The white smoke blurred the bottomless pain, and resolution surging in his eyes. 12 fragments of memory after that night. Something between Soo-won and Lin Yu underwent a subtle, yet irreversible change. Soo-won began to deliberately avoid Lin Yu. No more chance encounters in the pantry. No more narrow paths crossing in the elevator. She even tried to replace work reports with emails whenever possible. She was like a frightened snail, shrinking herself back into a thick shell. Lin Yu's whispered words about the scar on the temple and the undissolvable pain in his eyes were like an invisible thorn, deeply piercing her heart and leaving her no peace, day or night. That absurd notion that she might actually know him, or even had a very deep bond with him, grew wildly like weeds. She secretly searched the name Lin Yu online. There wasn't much information, only some business reports and official information about Huanjia Technology, without a trace of his private life. She also beat around the bush and asked Zhao Xiao and other colleagues. Everyone was secretive about President Lin's private life, knowing only that he was extremely low-key and had never heard of him being married or having a fixed partner. The less she could find, the heavier the cloud of suspicion in Soo-won's heart became. She began to dream frequently. In her dreams, there were always fragmented, grotesque scenes, the ear-piercing screech of brakes, the blinding glare of white light, the scent of disinfectant, and a blurry, tall figure calling out anxiously amidst the interplay of light and shadow. The voice was fractured and distant, impossible to make out. Every time she tried to get closer to see the figure clearly, the dream would come to an abrupt halt, leaving behind only a lingering sense of loss and a dull, phantom pain at her temples. And Lin Yu seemed to have sensed her avoidance. He no longer manufactured chance encounters, no longer sent mysterious deliveries, and even at the office, the look in his eyes had returned to its original cold, strictly professional state, as if his momentary loss of control in the car that night had been nothing more than a hallucination on Soo-won's part. Only occasionally during large meetings, when Soo-won spoke on behalf of the project team, could she feel that gaze resting upon her, heavy, carrying a soul-piercing scrutiny and complex emotions she could not comprehend. This deliberate detachment and the repressed undercurrents made Soo-won feel suffocated. She needed an answer that could extricate her from this tangled mess. The catalyst came on an ordinary Friday afternoon. The administration department sent an email notifying all employees to clear out their personal lockers in preparation for a fire safety inspection the following week. It was only then that Sue Wan remembered she had stuffed some random items into the old locker assigned to her in the corner of the technical department when she first joined. Key in hand, she walked over to the dust-covered locker. The door was stiff with rust and took some effort to pry open. A stale, dusty smell immediately wafted out. There wasn't much inside. An old canvas tote bag printed with her university logo, a few outdated technical magazines, and an unremarkable, dust-laden cardboard file box. Suwon removed the tote bag and magazines, her gaze landing on the file box. She had no memory of it. Perhaps it was just old data she had casually shoved inside back then. She blew the dust off the box and lifted it out. It wasn't locked. She casually lifted the lid. There were no documents inside, only a pile of junk. A few cheap, partially used gel pens, a cat keychain with worn edges, a half-used pack of tissues, and a thick, hardcover notebook with a starry sky design on the cover. Suwon's eyes were instantly drawn to the notebook. This notebook, she seemed to recall it. She had bought it right after graduation to record fragmented thoughts and plans. Later, work got too busy, and it fell into disuse. As if possessed, she reached out and pulled the notebook from the clutter. It felt heavy. She brushed the dust off the cover, revealing the starry design. She took a deep breath and, filled with an inexplicable nervousness, slowly opened the title page. There, in her own familiar handwriting, still retaining a trace of student-like innocence, were written several large characters. Suwon's journey to the stars. Go for it. The date was from 3 years ago. Suwon's heart rate unaccountably sped up. She continued to read. The first few pages recorded the confusion of her early days on the job and various work notes, along with a few whimsical project sketches. The handwriting was neat, brimming with the enthusiasm of a newcomer. She flipped through the pages quickly. The paper rustled. Suddenly, her fingers froze. The pages settled open at the middle of the notebook. On this page, there were no work notes, no project sketches. There was only a drawing, sketched with a black gel pen. The lines were somewhat immature, yet drawn with extreme seriousness and intensity. The drawing depicted a man's profile. The lines outlined a sharp jawline, a high bridge of the nose, thin lips pressed tight, and thick lashes slightly lowered. That coldness and focus between the brows, even with the simple strokes, exuded a familiarity that practically leapt off the page. It was Linyu, beside the outline of the man's profile, in handwriting just as serious, perhaps even bordering on reverent. The entire page was filled with tiny, densely packed characters. They were not work notes, nor were they plans. Instead, written over and over again, repeatedly filling the space, was the same name. Linyu, 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 Linyu. Those ink marks, some heavy and some light, layered over one another, were like silent cries. They carried the purest, most fervent, and most undisguised adoration and longing of a young girl, piercing through 3 years of time to rush straight at her. They crashed violently into Sue Wan's vision. Boom! Sue Wan felt as though something had exploded in her mind. An overwhelming dizziness instantly seized her. She stumbled back a step, her back slamming heavily against the cold metal door of the locker with a dull clang. The notebook slipped from her grasp and fell to the floor, lying open to the page filled with the name Linyu. She leaned against the cold, iron door, gasping for air, trying to calm the heart pounding so hard it felt like it would burst through her chest. A sharp, piercing pain shot through her temple. It felt like countless needles stabbing her all at once. Fragmented images, like film reels on fast forward, accompanied by a deafening roar, flooded insanely into her mind. A night of pouring rain, the headlights of a car skidding out of control, the screech of brakes, a massive impact, the agonizing pain of her body being thrown into the air and crashing down heavily. The ghastly white ceiling of a hospital, the pungent smell of disinfectant, the stiffness of being unable to move her whole body. A blurry, tall silhouette guarding her bedside day and night, tightly holding her hand, his palms searing hot. A low, hoarse voice repeating broken sentences in her ear over and over. One like, "Don't be afraid. I'm here. I beg you. Open your eyes." She finally woke up, gazing blankly at that haggard, stubble-covered, yet still heart-stoppingly handsome face. The ecstasy that instantly erupted in his eyes almost scorched her. He clumsily fed her porridge, moving with extreme caution for fear of burning her. He pushed her wheelchair, taking her downstairs to bask in the sun. The sunlight fell on his focused profile, softening his cold, hard features. At the entrance of the Civil Affairs Bureau, holding two bright red booklets, his usually stern face revealed a rare trace of nervousness and clumsy tenderness. The tips of his ears flushed a suspicious red. In their tiny rental apartment, she curled up on the sofa, watching a movie while he sat nearby, working a laptop on his knees. She secretly tucked her freezing feet under the hem of his warm sweater. He stiffened but didn't push her away, only glancing at her helplessly, the corners of his mouth quietly ticking up. At the company annual party, she was goaded into singing. So nervous, she forgot the lyrics and sang off-key, her face flushed red. He sat in the furthest corner offstage, watching her with a focused gaze and an indulgent smile, secretly recording her most embarrassing moment with his phone. And her temple, there really was a faint scar. It was from when she first learned to ride a bike and fell. Later, she used expensive scar removal cream, fading it until it was almost invisible. He actually remembered it so clearly. All the memory fragments, like a flood breaking a dike, surged and collapsed that invisible barrier, bringing vivid colors, sounds, textures, and even that once bone-deep love and sweetness, instantly filling her blank mind. He was Linyu, her boss, her husband. A short scream, filled with immense pain and realization, escaped Sue Wan's throat. She could support herself no longer and slid down the cold iron door to the floor, clutching her splitting head tightly with both hands. Tears poured out like broken pearls, instantly blurring her vision. On the ground, that open notebook, that page filled with the name Linyu, silently narrated a forgotten love as deep as the sea in the dim light. Top floor, CEO's office. Outside the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, the setting sun was like molten gold, dyeing the entire city a warm orange red. Linyu stood before the window, his straight back betraying a trace of imperceptible loneliness. He held a cup of black coffee that had long gone cold, yet he didn't drink. His deep gaze rested on the horizon, though his focus lay nowhere in particular. The internal office phone rang abruptly, breaking the silence. Linyu snapped back to reality, put down the cup, walked back to the desk, and pressed the answer button. Speak. Mr. Lin, the receptionist Lily's voice held hesitation and urgency. There seems to be a situation in the technical department. Suwon, she. Linyu's heart sank violently. An ominous premonition instantly seized him. His voice turned suddenly sharp and cold. What happened to her? She was just over by the lockers. She seems to have suddenly felt unwell. She fell down. She's crying really hard. Xiao and the others are with her, but Suwon's state is very wrong. She keeps shaking, holding her head. Lily's voice was panicked. The lockers? Linyu's pupils contracted sharply. He instantly remembered something. That specific locker he had strictly ordered the admin department not to touch. The one reserved specifically for her, containing her old belongings from before she joined. Could it be? Massive panic, like a giant icy hand, instantly clenched his heart. He cared about nothing else, slammed the phone down, and like an enraged cheetah, turned and sprinted toward the office door. Bang! The heavy solid wood door was flung open by him, crashing against the wall with a loud noise. He rushed out of the office and charged toward the private elevator, his knuckles turning white from the force as he frantically pressed the down button. The instant the elevator doors slid open, he strode in and punched the button for the technical department. As the elevator descended smoothly, time seemed to stretch into infinity. Every second was pure torture. Wanlong, what did you see? What have you remembered? Was it those sweet memories of the past? Or that heart-wrenching car accident? Will you hate me? Countless thoughts collided wildly in his mind, leaving him barely able to breathe. With a ding, the elevator doors parted. Linyu tore out like a black whirlwind, making a beeline for the storage area in the corner of the technical department. From a distance, he spotted that small figure. Suwon was curled up on the cold, dusty floor, her back resting against the equally cold metal doors of the lockers. Her head was bowed, her long, raven hair hanging in messy strands that obscured most of her face. Her slender shoulders trembled violently. Suppressed, broken sobs drifted out intermittently, like the whimpering of a wounded animal, wrenching at the heartstrings of anyone who heard. Zhao Xiao and several other female colleagues crowded around her, offering helpless comfort, their faces etched with anxiety. Wanwan, say something. Don't scare us. Is it your headache again? Should we call an ambulance? Suwon, can you hear us? Lin Yu's footsteps came to an abrupt halt. Across the span of a few meters, he stared at that figure curled in the corner, radiating immense sorrow and pain. It felt as if an invisible hand were violently tearing his heart apart. The agony instantly spread through every limb and bone in his body. He walked toward her, each step as heavy as lead. When the colleagues surrounding Suwon saw Lin Yu, they fell instantly silent, subconsciously parting to make way, their faces filled with shock and awe. Lin Yu didn't look at anyone. From start to finish, his gaze was locked firmly on that tiny, trembling figure. He reached her and crouched down. His movements were slow and heavy. He reached out, his fingertips trembling imperceptibly and gently, with extreme caution, brushed away the messy hair plastered to her cheeks by tears. His touch was incredibly tender, as if he were handling a fragile, rare treasure. Her small, pale, wet face was revealed. Crystal-clear teardrops clung to her long lashes. Her cheeks were stained with tears, and her eyes were red and swollen like peaches. She seemed still immersed in the massive emotional shock. Her eyes were unfocused, filled with confusion and pain. Lin Yu's heart ached to the point of suffocation. He looked at her, seeing his own anxious and pained reflection in her eyes. Time seemed to freeze in that moment. The entire technical department was silent as the grave. Everyone held their breath, staring in disbelief at a scene destined to go down in the annals of company gossip. Their lofty, frost-cold President Lin was actually crouching so carefully in front of an intern, and his movements were so gentle. Lin Yu took a deep breath, suppressing the lump in his throat. He reached out, his movements incredibly soft, attempting to touch her ice-cold fingers. Wanwan. His voice was terribly hoarse, laced with the immense fear of someone afraid to lose what they had just regained, and filled with caution. Look at me. It's me. Just as his fingertips were about to brush against her, Suwon, who had kept her head lowered in agony, suddenly looked up. Those eyes, washed by tears, were now like ignited stars, shockingly bright. Gone was the confusion. Gone was the pain. All that remained was a piercing clarity that had broken through the fog, and a burning, scorching flame. She looked at Lin Yu, who was inches away, gazing into his eyes filled with pain, worry, and bottomless affection. The next second, under the horrified gazes of the crowd, who looked as if they had been collectively turned to stone, Suwon suddenly reached out and wrapped her arms around Lin Yu's neck. Her movement was fast, precise, fierce, carried by a resolve to risk everything. Then, under the world-shattering gaze of every Illusion Tech employee present, she stood on her tiptoes, used all her strength, and fiercely, precisely pressed her lips against Lin Yu's thin lips, lips that usually remained tight and dispensed only cold commands. MMPH. Lin Yu's pupils dilated to the extreme. His mind went blank, the soft, trembling, yet incredibly real sensation on his lips, carrying the salty taste of tears and her unique, sun-kissed scent. It was like the most violent electric current, instantly piercing through all his reason and defenses. Time truly stood still. The entire technical department was silent enough to hear a pin drop. Only the old server in the corner continued to emit a low hum. Suwon pressed tightly against him, kissing him with chaotic abandon, even biting him with a hint of ferocity. It was as if she wanted to convey the 3-year void, all the grievances, confusion, anger, and the immense ecstasy of regaining what was lost, fiercely transferring it all to him through this kiss. A few seconds passed, or Perhaps it was as long as a century. Suwon abruptly let go, took a step back, and created some distance between them. Her cheeks were flushed crimson from excitement and lack of oxygen. Her chest heaved violently, and her lips looked particularly rosy and alluring due to the violent act just now. She tilted her head back, and with eyes burning as bright as flames, she stared fixedly at Lin Yu. Every word she spoke smashed into the silent air, and into Lin Yu's chaotic mind, with absolute clarity. Lin Yu, I remember now. I remember everything, including... She took a short breath, her eyes flashing with a gleam of cunning and burning resolve, her voice ironclad. You took advantage of my amnesia and tricked me into calling you uncle for 3 months. And you forced me to write 10 reports. How are we going to settle this score? How about considering remarriage? Now, immediately, right this second. 14. The declaration of remarriage. The entire technical department of Phantom World Technology fell into a strange, vacuum-like dead silence. The low hum of the servers became the only background noise. Dozens of eyes widened into circles. Mouths gaped open wide enough to fit a goose egg, and gazes focused in unison on the 2 people at the center of the storm. Suwon, with her slightly disheveled clothes, flushed cheeks, and eyes shining like searchlights, and President Lin, who stood stiffly on the spot after being forcibly kissed, his usually cold face wearing a near-blank expression for the first time. Remarriage? Uncle? 10 reports? The massive amount of information was like a nuclear explosion. The shockwave instantly destroyed the worldview and CPUs of all the onlookers. The folder in Xiao's hand hit the ground with a clatter, but she remained completely oblivious. She just clamped her hand tightly over her mouth, her eyes wide as copper bells, flashing with a manic gleam of someone thinking, "My ship is officially real." Lin Yu remained in the posture of having had Suwon's arms around his neck, his body as stiff as a stone statue. The lingering soft warmth on his lips and that tearful, domineering, chaotic kiss burned like a brand. In his deep eyes, shock swept through like a tsunami, washing away his usual composure and restraint until they were scattered and broken. He looked at the woman before him, face upturned, like a proud little lion with its fur ruffled. Her eyes were so bright, so clear, carrying the wild ecstasy of something lost and found, the anger of being deceived, and that familiar courage and love that belonged only to Suwon, reckless and absolute. 3 years, over 1,000 days and nights of suffering, waiting, cautious probing, the pain of being forgotten. In this moment, in her shockingly bright eyes, and in her earth-shattering phrase, "Consider remarriage," it all collapsed with a crash, turning into a surging warm current that instantly flooded his limbs and bones. His stiff body warmed up bit by bit. The ice in the depths of his eyes melted like snow in spring, rippling with gentle yet turbulent waves. He slowly, extremely slowly, raised his hand, not to push her away, but to use the pad of his finger to wipe away the wet tear tracks on her cheek, extremely gently and with infinite cherishing. The movement was unbelievably tender. Then, under the jaw-dropping gaze of everyone present, the corners of Lin Yu's mouth curled up bit by bit. It was no longer a cold arc, nor a faint smile of bad taste, nor a polite business expression. It was a genuine, unreserved, incredibly brilliant smile, like glaciers melting and sunlight flooding the earth, filled with the immense ecstasy of regaining what was lost, and a deep affection so thick it could not be dissolved. He reached out his arms, not with the brute force Suwon had used to pull him earlier, but with a gesture of absolute possession and protection. He firmly and powerfully pulled that little woman, who was still glaring at him in frustration, into his broad, warm embrace. He held her tight, as if to knead her into his very flesh and blood, never to be separated again. Suwon was caught off guard by the hug. Her nose bumped against his hard chest, stinging slightly. His scent, a crisp cedar mixed with a faint smell of tobacco, dominantly enveloped her. That warm and powerful embrace carried a familiarity and sense of security that made her soul tremble. She struggled for a moment, making a symbolic protest. "Hey, Lin Yu, you haven't answered me yet. About the reports and the remarriage. From above her head came Lin Yu's low laughter, vibrating in his chest with amusement and doting affection. Reports. His chin rested on the crown of her soft hair, his voice muffled and laced with a smile. Whether Mrs. Lin wants to burn them for firewood or fold them into paper airplanes, it's all up to you, as long as you're happy. He loosened his hold on her slightly and lowered his head. His deep eyes seemed to hold the entire galaxy, locking intently and passionately onto her lips, which were parted slightly in surprise. As for remarrying, he deliberately dragged out the syllables, watching Su Wan's expression instantly tense up, the amusement in his eyes deepening. He lowered his head further, his warm breath brushing against her ear. His voice was low and seductive, carrying a domineering declaration of ownership and an unquestionable tenderness. There is no need to consider it. Right now, immediately, this instant, come home with me. 2. Get the household register. 15. A happy return 1 month later. The door to the CEO's office on the top floor of Phantom Tech was pushed open, and Lin Yu walked out holding Su Wan's hand. Su Wan wore a bright smile on her face, while her other hand ostentatiously held up 2 brand-new, glaringly red marriage certificates. The staff from the technical department, administration, marketing, and others who had long been waiting outside, pretending to be passing by, but actually there for the gossip, instantly erupted into earth-shattering applause and whistles. Congratulations, President Lin. Congratulations, boss's wife. Happy wedding. May you be together forever. Have a baby soon, President Lin. For once, Lin Yu didn't have a cold expression. With a faint smile playing on his lips, he calmly accepted everyone's well wishes. He turned his head to look at his little wife beside him, whose cheeks were slightly flushed but who was smiling brilliantly. His gaze was so gentle it could drown a person. Su Wan openly waved the red booklets in her hand, cleared her throat, and flashed a mischievous smile at Zhao Xiao, who was squeezed at the very front taking photos like crazy. Ahem, let me make an official announcement. From now on, you can call me Su Wan. Calling me the boss's wife. That works too. However, she changed her tone, glancing at the tall, handsome man beside her with a hint of smugness. If you want to call your president, Lin. She paused deliberately, watching Lin Yu raise an eyebrow slightly, then enunciated clearly and loudly. You have to pay extra. Haha. The boss's wife is mighty. President Lin, did you hear that? Pay extra. The entire top floor was instantly drowned in raucous laughter and cheering. Lin Yu looked at the spirited, mischievous little woman beside him, the amusement in his eyes nearly overflowing. He shook his head helplessly, reached out, and naturally wrapped his arm around her shoulder, pulling her tighter into his embrace. He lowered his head and whispered in her ear, in a voice only the two of them could hear. Fine. Pay extra. My salary card is under your control. And I'm under your control, too. Permanent edition. Mrs. Lin. Su Wan tilted her face up, crashing into his eyes filled with stars and doting affection. Her eyes curved in a smile like a little fox that had stolen some honey. Sunlight poured through the massive floor-to-ceiling windows, casting their embraced silhouette into a long, long shadow. Outside the window was the bustling city. Inside the window was a perfection that had been lost and found again. Su Wan hummed a tune, buzzing about like a happy little bee as she rummaged through the walk-in closet. With the marriage certificate in hand and the wedding being planned, she could finally openly move her things back to her home. Lin Yu's ridiculously large penthouse, decorated so coldly it looked like a showroom. That capitalist, his taste is as frigid as ever. Su Wan grumbled as she discovered a dusty, old cardboard box deep inside a massive, barely used wardrobe. What's this? She curiously dragged the box out. It was heavy. She brushed off the dust and opened the lid. It wasn't anything valuable inside, but rather, old things? A few t-shirts she had worn in college, washed until they were faded. A cat plushie with worn edges. A few comic books with dog-eared pages. And a thick notebook with a black leather cover. It looked much older than the Starry Sky notebook she had found in the company locker. Su Wan picked up the black leather notebook. There were no markings on the cover. With a hint of curiosity, she turned to the first page. The familiar, sharp, and powerful handwriting belonging to Lin Yu came into view. She smiled at me today, her eyes curved like crescent moons. Stupidly cute. Date. For years ago. Suwon's heart skipped a beat. She couldn't wait to read on. Worked overtime until 10. Found out she had just left too. Secretly followed her all the way to ensure she entered her residential compound safely. She likes to kick little stones when she walks, like a primary schooler. She actually discussed with someone in the pantry whether I was transformed from an AI. The reason being that I never drink milk tea. Took her home. It's raining. The umbrella was too small. Half her shoulder got wet. Must get a bigger one next time. Her proposal was riddled with holes. I criticized it a bit too harshly. Seeing her eyes turn red, I felt a bit regretful. Next time, be more tactful. She wore a red dress today, like a ripe little tomato. It made me dizzy just looking at her. Wanted to take a bite. Damn it. She actually smiled so sweetly at that new intern. The way that kid looks at her isn't right. Need to find a reason to transfer him to the Africa branch. The accident was my fault. If I hadn't let her go home alone that day. Wan, I beg you, don't leave me behind. She woke up. She doesn't remember me. She called me. Mr. Lin. Felt like a knife. She's chasing after me again. Eyes sparkling. Just like in the beginning. But she's forgotten. She's forgotten everything. Including loving me. Sent her Japanese food. She shared it with her colleagues. Fine. I suppose she has a way with winning people over. Sent her roses. She said it was a departmental perk. She's getting bolder. Forced her to do 10 reports. Was that too harsh? But the way she looks when she pulls an all-night really makes me want to bully her. Stood guard downstairs all night. Only dare to leave after seeing her come out safely. Want to hold her. Miss her so much I'm going crazy. The scar on her forehead. It's really gone. Just like the 3 years erased between us. She kissed me. She remembers. She said, let's remarry. Wan, my Wan, is back. The last page of the diary stopped it yesterday. The ink was very fresh. There was only one line. Permanent, Mrs. Lin. Came home today. Suwon cradled the heavy diary, devouring it page by page. Tears slid silently down her face, dripping onto the yellowed paper and blooming into small, dark stains. It turned out that during the years she had forgotten, during the days she was re-pursuing him, this man had been loving her and guarding her in such a clumsy yet profound way, chronicling every little detail about her. Behind what she thought was exploitation, coincidences, and the sadistic whims of an ice-cold boss, lay his carefulness over what he had lost and found again, his unspeakable pain, and a love he wrote with his very soul. She held the diary, laughing through her tears. It turned out that after all the twists and turns, whether it was amnesia or reunion, the starlight she chased had never faded away. He had always been there. 16 proof of love. Behind her, beside her, in her heart. What are you looking at? You're smiling like a fool. Lin Yu's deep voice came from the doorway. He had just finished a video conference. He had loosened his tie and was leaning lazily against the doorframe. Suwon looked up. Tear tracks still stained her face, yet her smile was incredibly brilliant. She held up the black leather diary and shook it, her eyes shining as if they held the entire galaxy. I'm reading about a certain duplicitous capitalist who secretly loves me and gets jealous. The ironclad proof. Lin Yu's gaze fell on the diary in her hand, and understanding dawned instantly. A very faint, almost imperceptible blush flashed across his handsome face before being masked by his usual aloofness. He strode over with undeniable authority, snatched the diary from Suwon's hand, and tossed it back into the box. Then, he bent down and scooped the woman wearing that smug grin up into a princess carry. Hey, Lin Yu, what are you doing? Suwon exclaimed, though her arms naturally wrapped around his neck. Lin Yu carried her, striding towards the bedroom, his voice low and dangerous, filled with a deep smile and a declaration. Destroying the evidence. And while I'm at it, collecting some interest, Mrs. Permanent Lin,